Every family has at least one story that they bring out at reunions, right? The kind that makes the room go quiet, even the kids leaning in. In my family, it isn't a ghost bride or a cursed photograph or anything like that. It's something stranger. They tell it like a memory, not a legend. And even though the details line up each time, the part that haunts me isn't what actually happened. It's what might have happened next. Back in the early 1970s, my mother and her siblings were raised on a lonely stretch of land in rural Kansas. The farmhouse was small but sturdy, sitting back from a gravel road behind an overgrown driveway. There were no streetlights, no neighbors in sight, except for a barn about a mile away. My grandmother had been widowed young and worked long days at a canning plant in town. Every evening, she'd catch the same late bus, walking the last stretch home with snacks of food and occasionally little treats for the kids. Because there were 6 of them, the eldest, my Aunt Clara, became the default caretaker. She was 12, old enough to cook, not old enough to feel safe in the big house when the sun went down. The children had a bit of a ritual too. At dusk, when their mother's voice called from the end of the drive, they'd rush out to greet her and help carry everything back. Now, one cold October evening, the sky was already a deep purple when they heard it, a voice at the end of the drive calling out to them. Not just similar to their mother's, but identical. The tone, the lilt, the exact phrase that she always used. "Come on out and give me a hand, will you?" All 6 of them heard it. 4 of the younger ones bolted out of the front door before Clara could stop them, the gravel crunching under their shoes as they sprinted towards the dark road. The driveway had no lights, but they knew it by heart by now. No one thought twice about not hearing the bus. Sometimes it arrived earlier and sometimes later. But when the children reached the end of the driveway, the road was empty. No bus, no mother, just fields stretching away into shadow. No crickets, in fact. No sound at all. Clara came running after them, furious at first and then suddenly terrified. She called out, "Mum." The sound died against the open land. The younger ones began to whimper a bit. Then Clara said that she felt it. A sudden drop in the air. Not like a breeze, but like the warmth being pulled out of her body. She quickly ordered everyone back into the house, and they didn't argue. Inside, they locked every door and pushed the kitchen table in front of the main entrance. No one spoke above a whisper, and the smallest child, barely 5, kept saying, "It sounded like her, but it wasn't her," over and over again. None of them slept that night. They stayed in a tight cluster on the living room floor, waiting for a knock at the door that never actually came. The next morning, just after sunrise, their real mother arrived by taxi, not by bus. She had apparently missed the last bus the night before and stayed with a co-worker in town. When Clara told her about what happened, their mother went pale and wouldn't step onto the porch for a long time. To this day, no one in my family claims to know what had mimicked her voice. Some say that it was a predator, human or otherwise. Others think that it was something older, something from the fields. My Aunt Clara swears that the voice wasn't outside at all, but was coming from the middle of the driveway, as though waiting for them. We still tell the story at gatherings, but there's a part that we rarely include. That weeks later, a neighbor found strange footprints in the frost along the gravel road, small but deep, circling in place. It's an odd detail, I know, and something that may not be related, but still, it was so close to the time, and with everything that happened, we cannot help but feel like it had something to do with it all. But here's my question for all of you. What do you think it is that we encountered? I have personally wrapped my brain over this whole thing for years, and I still haven't come up with any solid answers. So if you have any theories as to what this might have been, then I'm all ears. When my wife and I first moved to Louisiana, we weren't looking for anything glamorous, just a roof over our heads and a place that we could afford while saving for something better. We found a weatherboard little rental in a quiet street, shaded by pecan trees. 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, and a small den that we turned into a makeshift media room. The paint was a little bit chipped, the floor creaked in odd places, but it felt like a bit of a blank canvas to us. And for a while, we even called it our practice house, a stepping stone. The first couple of weeks were uneventful too. We unpacked, hung curtains, painted the den, and tried to ignore the faint smell of mildew that seemed to linger no matter how much we cleaned. By the 3rd week, though, something started to shift. Not in a movie-style, one big scare kind of way, but more like the feeling that you get when you sense someone is staring at you from across the room. It began with doors. They would open and shut when no draft was present, sometimes right in front of us, in fact. We blamed it on old hinges, misaligned frames, or the air conditioning at times. Louisiana houses do settle a bit, and we told ourselves that. One evening, we were both in the shower when we heard a clear, deliberate knock on the bathroom door. Not a creak or a tap or anything, but the kind of knock that you do when you're trying to get someone's attention. We froze. My wife whispered for me to go and check it, but we were both half soaked and half terrified. We waited, but the knock didn't repeat itself. After we got out, I searched the entire house, and I found no forced entry and no signs anyone had been inside. It was definitely a little bit unsettling, but in the end we just sort of let it go. Then came the scream. It was around 6 in the morning on a humid morning when we both woke to a man's voice, a literal raw shout, echoing from the hallway. Not a word or not a phrase, but just a guttural sort of desperate scream. I literally bolted upright. My wife sat up at the same time and asked, "Who's yelling?" And that was enough to confirm that I wasn't imagining it myself. We got up, searched the house, but there was nothing. Windows were locked, doors secured, and there was no one else around. After that, it wasn't a one-off too. The same scream, the same time on multiple mornings. Always just long enough to wake us up, but never long enough to sort of locate it. A few times we came home to the sound of faint arguing in the den too. We would hear low voices until we reached the kitchen, and then silence. Mind you, there was no radio or TV on in the house. In fact, there was nothing that could have caused that. My wife began to have nightmares too. In them, she was chased through our house, but the rooms were sort of stripped bare, the walls splintered, the floors rotting. She said that she would hide in the den, only to hear something dragging across the floor toward her. The details were always the same too. She woke up sweating and shaking often. She's Irish Catholic, and her mother urged her to have a priest bless the house at one point. We did this, and it might have helped for a week maybe, but then everything resumed, only more subtle, I guess. A cold hand brushing my back at night, breathing where there shouldn't be any, the sense of being watched from corners that looked empty. By that point, my wife moved in with her sister, refusing to sleep another night there. I stayed behind to finish packing and break the lease and all that. My brother-in-law came in over to help me as well, and as we boxed up our things, one of the older neighbors stopped by. He leaned on the fence a little bit and said in a low voice, "You folks didn't know about this place, did you?" He told us that the house hadn't just been a drug den before, but before that, decades earlier, it had been used as an illegal boarding house where transient workers and runaways came and went. 2 people had vanished there in the 1970s, apparently. Some whispered about a third who was never reported missing. The last tenant, yes, a small-time dealer, had apparently died of a heart attack in the same back bedroom after days of binging on meth. No one found him for 3 days, and it was a mess when he was found. Suddenly, my wife's dreams made a lot more sense. The desolate rooms, the footsteps. It wasn't just his ghost. Maybe it was everything layered beneath it. All the fear, all the pain, compacted into the walls like rot. We moved out that weekend. The landlord, he didn't argue. In fact, he handed us our deposit without a word, as though he had expected this outcome. The new house that we found is unremarkable, and there's no creaks, no knocks, no breathing where there shouldn't be any breathing. At night it's almost too quiet, in fact, but we've learned to welcome that kind of quiet now after all of this. Sometimes my wife will still catch me staring at the walls and ask if I'm thinking about the Louisiana house. I usually just shrug. The truth is that I don't think about it as much as I sort of feel it, I guess. Like a place that's still happening somewhere without us there. Doors opening to empty rooms, a man's scream literally echoing down the hall every dawn. It was a terrifying experience and something that I will never forget. When I first moved into the house, I thought the dolls were just quirky. My aunt had lived there for years and collected them. Porcelain, cloth, wooden, some tiny, some life-sized. They were in every room. The living room, the dining room, even the kitchen. Most of them had wide eyes, mouths frozen in expressions of shock, sadness, or outright terror. I didn't like them, but I thought that it was all just harmless. The first week was fine too. I unpacked, set up my room, and mostly avoided the other rooms. But then I noticed small things, like a doll on the staircase would be slightly turned from where I remembered it. One on the kitchen table was facing the opposite direction all of a sudden. At first, I chalked it up to my aunt moving them when she cleaned, or maybe the cat brushing past them. It wasn't until the morning after my first night alone that it really hit me. I woke up to sunlight streaming through my bedroom window and instantly froze. On my bed, sitting upright, was one of the dolls that I didn't even recognize. A medium-sized porcelain girl with long brown hair and a cracked smile. She was not on my bed when I went to sleep, I can guarantee you that. What's worse, though, is that she was holding something. My small silver locket that I had left on the nightstand. I thought that it was a joke, or maybe coincidence, so I set the locket back down and placed the doll back on the dresser. When I went to brush my teeth, that was when I saw another change. Dolls in the living room were now facing toward my bedroom door. Dolls in the hallway, previously angled toward the wall, were now angled toward me. I didn't see anything that would suggest that someone would have been moving them, and the doors were locked too. Well, that night I stayed awake in my room, doors closed, lights on. Every sound, the creak of the floorboards, the scratching of the old radiator, it all made my stomach churn. Around 2 a.m., I swore that I heard soft plastic shuffling from the hallway too. And my cat, usually indifferent, crouched low too and hissed toward the bathroom. I didn't dare investigate. When morning came, I hesitated to leave my room. The dolls in the living room were different too. Their expressions seemed sharper, angrier, more desperate, as if they had been watching me all night. I checked my bed. Thankfully, my own doll hadn't moved, but a smaller one was now on the nightstand, staring at me, now holding my hairbrush. Genuinely, I could not explain it too. Nothing in the house suggested that anybody else had even been there. No signs of break-in, no drafts that could have knocked them over. Just the dolls, slowly repositioning themselves, as if they were alive. After that, I started keeping the bedroom door closed at all times, and I never touched any of the dolls ever again. I moved my own personal items into a backpack, and I slept with it on my lap. I don't know if the dolls were cursed, sentient, or if I had just finally reached the point where my imagination was feeding on their grotesque expressions. I just know that I never want to find anything on my bed that wasn't there before, ever again. Even now, months later, I cannot walk past a doll without at least checking twice. I'm still trying to wrap my head around what actually happened here. It's been several days and I keep replaying it over and over, but none of it makes sense. Last weekend, my brother, 26 in male, and I, 29 in female, we were coming back from a late formal event in another town. We'd been on the road for hours already, and it was getting pretty close to midnight. The highway was empty, no cars, no lights, just miles of dark forest on either side. The only glow came from the dashboard and the occasional flash of our headlights catching the trunks of the trees that we passed. Around the halfway point, my brother told me that he desperately needed to use the bathroom. He'd been holding it in for a while apparently, but now couldn't wait any longer. We hadn't seen a gas station for nearly an hour, I suppose, and the GPS showed nothing but back roads ahead, so we decided to pull over onto a gravel shoulder where the road narrowed. On my side of the car, the ground was lined with jagged rocks and low thorny plants, but the other side sloped on into the woods. The trees, they were dense, but not impossible to walk through. My brother hesitated at first. He didn't like the idea of going into the woods at this time, but his bladder won out in the end, and he asked me to come with him so that he wouldn't be alone. We left the hazard lights on, took my phone for light, and stepped out into the tree line. The ground dripped slightly, soft underfoot, and after about 50 or 60 meters, we reached a small sort of leaf-strewn clearing, and it was quiet in a way that didn't feel normal, or maybe even natural. There were no insects, no wind, just a sort of heavy muffled silence all of a sudden. He muttered that this was good enough and told me to turn around. He started fumbling with his jacket and belt, trying to be quick. Out of awkwardness, I just sort of stood there looking up at the sky, and out of unspoken courtesy, we sort of turned off the flashlight to give the privacy that he needed. But instantly, the darkness just swallowed us whole. The only sounds were really coming from us, from shuffling and obviously him urinating on dry leaves and the faint hum of the highway far behind us, but then, from the darkness, my brother let out a sharp sort of panicked yell. Not a startled noise, but a full-on shout of fear. I nearly dropped my phone trying to turn the light back on. When the beam finally cut through the darkness, he was half turned toward me, eyes wide, his hand still gripping his waistband, and he said, "Somebody grabbed me." His voice cracked. The hands, they were on my back. My blood went cold. There was nobody in sight. I spun in circles, shining the light in every direction, trees, underbrush, even up into the branches, but as far as I could tell, we were alone. Or at least it looked that way. He yanked his clothes back into place, shaking, and hissed at me to hurry. That was when I heard it too. Soft, deliberate crunching on the leaves, like slow footsteps moving just out of sight. We both froze, and I whispered, "Do you hear that?" He nodded, without taking his eyes off the dark. The steps stopped, then started again, but from a different direction, closer this time. Well, hearing that, we instantly bolted. Branches whipped at our faces as we sprinted back the way that we had come through, and in the rush, the beam of my phone jerked wildly, catching nothing but blurred bark and empty air, but we burst out onto the asphalt, but it wasn't where we had parked. In fact, the car was now nowhere in sight. For a moment, neither of us said anything and had no idea what to do. We just stood there, breathing hard and trying to orient ourselves. The road was dead quiet though, lined with trees in both directions. Then, maybe 100 meters down the shoulder, we saw our car's hazard lights blinking through the fog. We didn't speak, we just ran. We jumped in, slammed the doors, and we instantly locked them. The forest on either side of the road seemed darker than before too, almost like the trees themselves had moved closer. My brother started the engine but sat there gripping the wheel with white knuckles, staring ahead. We drove without talking as well for at least several miles, both of us checking the rearview mirror more than once. There was nothing following us, thankfully. Nothing on the road either. In fact, there was nothing at all. We've both been trying to come up with an explanation since that night. Like, maybe it was an animal, maybe we panicked and imagined the footsteps, but neither of us can explain how he felt hands on him or how we ended up exiting the woods so far from where we had entered. And we definitely went back the way that we had come through. I mean, there really was no other way. We haven't taken that route since, and next time that either of us needs to use a bathroom break, we'll be waiting for sure, no matter how bad it might feel. So I'd been bow hunting in a remote swamp bottom in southwest Georgia this past weekend. It's one of those places that takes real effort to get to as well. Almost 3/4 of a mile through brush and uneven ground from the nearest clearing even. Nobody had been down there in at least 4 years, I would imagine, and the old trail was more memory than path now. By the time that I finally set up my stand, the woods were already pretty quiet and heavy with that sort of pre-dusk stillness. I have hunted in these woods my whole life. I've heard just about everything that can make a person's hair stand on end. Foxes screaming, raccoons fighting, the occasional tree falling hard enough to sound like a gunshot. None of it ever really rattled me too much though. But what happened that night has been sitting in my head ever since. So just before dark, maybe 20 yards off to my right, I heard a sort of slow rustling in the thicket. Not the skitter of a squirrel or the flutter of a bird. This was heavier, measured, like something big moving carefully. My first thought was maybe a hog or perhaps an elk. I stayed still. The whole reason that I was out there was to bring something home after all, and I'd already sat all day without seeing too much, so I told myself to wait. The light dropped pretty quickly. In that swamp bottom, dusk feels like someone turning a dimmer switch all the way down, really. And so, within minutes, everything around me was just a silhouette. That rustling was definitely still there, just off to my right, moving but never showing itself. And about 10 minutes after full dark, that was when it started. At first, I thought it was some kind of a bird call. 3 sharp clucking sounds, spaced just enough apart to make me think that it was a turkey. But the tone was off, too deep and too slow. Before I could even process it, the sounds suddenly changed as well. 2 dry guttural heaves like someone trying not to vomit. Then, 2 owl hoots, but warped, pitched wrong, echoing sort of unnaturally. And finally, a single high, clean whistle. All of it in direct succession, mind you, one right after another from the exact same spot in that thicket. Mind you, it was at least as loud as a coyote howl, but there wasn't a coyote alive that could mimic that string of noises. I sat there, and my bow felt like dead weight in my hand suddenly. Every hair on my arm stood up. Then it did it again. Not the same sequence, but close. The clucks slower this time, and the heaves louder. The whistles drawn out into a thin, trembling note. And under all of it, like a bad recording played too slow, there was something human. Not quite words, but like cadence of speech almost, or mumbling. That was when I realized that this was not an animal call. It was something trying to sound like one. I tried to breathe quietly, but my heart was pounding so hard that I could hear it in my ears. Another whistle, softer now, like somebody trying to coax a dog. Then, silence. The kind of silence where you know that something is watching you. I didn't even bother packing up. I climbed down from my stand as quietly as I could, but every creak of metal steps felt deafening, let me tell you. When I hit the ground, the thicket went dead still again, and I told myself not to run and to try and walk quietly. Halfway back to the clearing, I swear that I heard it behind me. One single drawn-out cluck. Then, from another direction ahead of me, the same whistle. Whatever it was moving faster than I could. I walked faster, eyes darting between the dark shapes of trees, trying to keep my breathing steady. The brush felt thicker than before, the trail harder to follow. I didn't see anything, but every few seconds, I caught faint noises. A dry heave off of the left, or a low hoot behind me, like 2 or 3 things answering each other almost. By the time that I broke out into the clearing where my truck was parked, my hands were shaking so badly that I dropped my keys twice trying to unlock the door. I haven't figured it out yet. Nobody else was anywhere near that swamp. The property is private, mind you, and the only people who knew where I was were hours away. If it was some kind of prank, I mean, they'd have to hike deep into the swamp and mimic calls at night with perfect timing. I've been in the woods long enough to know the difference between a fox's scream and a person's as well. And this was something else entirely. I don't think it was quite human, but it wasn't quite animal either, but close enough to both that it just felt wrong. I really don't think that I'll be hunting in that spot again. I'm not really the type to spook easily. I grew up hunting, hiking, and camping alone, and I'm used to weird sounds at night, really. But what happened last weekend, I don't know how to explain it. You see, I'd gone out to camp in a state forest about an hour from my town. Nothing too deep, but far enough off the trails that you don't see other people once the sun goes down. I set up camp near a small creek. I cooked some food, and by the time that it got dark, I was just sort of sitting by the fire, scrolling through my phone until I lost service again. Around 11 p.m., I noticed this pale light moving low over the tree line. At first, I thought it was a plane, but it didn't blink like one. It was more like a slow, steady glow, almost like a flare, but too controlled. Then another one appeared, a little farther off. They didn't make a sound and just sort of drifted. I stood up and watched for a while, trying to film with my phone, but the video showed really not too much, just pixels. In fact, it was almost like the camera sort of refused to pick it up. I must have been staring at those lights for a good few minutes, but the next thing that I remember, I was on the ground by the fire pit. My fire was out, my flashlight was off, and when I checked my watch, it now said 2:17 a.m. Now, I don't remember lying down at all. I don't remember the lights going away, and it was just gone. Hours of time just blank. But my head felt thick, like when you wake up from a nap that you didn't mean to take. The forest was silent, no bugs, no wind, just heavy silence. I stood up and immediately noticed something else too. My clothes were wrong. My shirt was on inside out and backwards. My belt was buckled from the wrong side. My socks didn't match, and it was like somebody else had dressed me. Well, I ripped my jacket off and flipped my shirt back the right way, and my hands were shaking so bad that I could barely do up my belt. The whole time, I had this feeling that somebody was behind me too, just at the edge of the fire circle, but when I turned, it was only trees. I didn't bother packing up properly. I just shoved my sleeping bag into the trunk. I grabbed my pack and half ran the trail back to the car with my flashlight bouncing the whole way. Every time that I flicked it ahead, though, I could have sworn that I saw pale shapes between the trees, like the lights had followed me, but when I shined them directly, there was nothing there. When I finally got to my car, it was dead quiet. Even starting the engine just felt wrong, like it was too loud for the woods. I drove all the way home without turning on the radio, just listening. It's been a few days now, and I still don't remember what happened between those lights and the waking up moment. The clothes are the part that gets me the most, though. I just cannot think of a single explanation for how that would have happened if I had just fallen asleep like that. I don't think that I'll be going camping alone for a while, and I certainly will not be going back out there. When I look back on my childhood home, there's one thing that I've never been able to explain. I didn't even consider it online until recently, when I mentioned it to my wife and she immediately recognized the description from things that she had read. Looking back, I strongly suspect that what I encountered as a kid was something like a mimic, an entity that could take the appearance of familiar people. The first memory that I have is from when I was about 6. I woke up in the middle of the night and saw someone cross my doorway. It was unmistakably my mum, the way that she moved, the nightgown that she wore. But when I called her name, the figure sort of arched and contorted like an animal might, as if it was testing me or reacting to being noticed. I ducked under the covers, and when I peeked again, it was gone. I can still remember the feeling of tension in the air, though, the subtle wrongness of it all. Well, a few years later, I was home alone in the middle of school when the power cut out during the day. The basement of our house had old ceilings that rattled with movement all the time. Immediately after the lights went out, I heard heavy footsteps above me, banging and scraping that sounded like furniture was being thrown around up there. It lasted for a full minute, and when the power returned, I went upstairs and everything was in place. Nothing had been moved. Near the end of high school as well, another incident occurred. So I often napped on the basement couch on weekends, and one evening I woke up and saw a figure at the computer, bathed in the monitor's glow. It looked like my dad, but something was off. When I spoke, the figure tensed and sort of shifted posture as well, not turning toward me, but radiating hostility in its stance. I sat still for a moment, gathering myself, then blinked, and when I did, it was gone. I was awake the whole time, though, and afterward I stayed up the rest of the night. The last experience happened in college. I came home late one night and felt a cold spot in the hallway outside of my bedroom. I tried to ignore it, but when I got into bed, I then felt someone sit on the edge of the mattress opposite me. A hand rested on my shoulder, and a familiar soft voice said, "Hey, wake up." It sounded exactly like my dad, but he had never spoken like that. I jumped up, and when I did, the room was empty. After that, I never saw or felt anything else in the house again. I lived there off and on for like several more years, including extended visits, and never experienced another incident, thankfully. But the whole thing left me with a mix of sort of disbelief and unease, I guess you could say. I mean, what had I seen? Why did it appear in forms that I trusted? but behave in ways that were so wrong. The gentleness in the final encounter contrasted with the fear from earlier events too, leaving a confusing memory that I carry to this day. I never did tell my parents about these experiences. Even now, thinking back about it makes me uneasy too. Sharing it here with all of you guys, though, having heard other accounts that sound similar, I realize that I really wasn't alone. That there are forces or entities out there that can imitate what's familiar, and sometimes they present themselves in ways that feel both frightening and oddly personal. I used to think that the worst thing that a classmate could do was spread rumors or stab you in the back socially. I had no idea that there was deeper, darker games being played by people until I met her. Back in my first year of high school, I ended up getting close to a girl who was, different, I guess you could say. At first she seemed like she just had a bit of a rough life, and genuinely I felt a bit bad for her. But the longer that we hung out, the more I noticed how guarded she was. She hated when I asked basic questions about her family, where she lived, or even her last name. She dodged or changed the subject every time, and whenever I thought I was getting to know her, she would shut down completely or start oversharing things that just didn't add up at all. Well, around the time that I had a crush on her, she found out and everything between us shifted. She started saying strange things like she worked nights and that she could introduce me to real life, that she could take me to places where no one would judge us. She'd push me to skip school and to leave campus with her to see what the world was really like. She would dangle it like a dare, and back then, being a shy kid who didn't have many friends, I was curious but also uneasy. We eventually stopped talking after she got expelled though. Teachers and even a school officer pulled me aside and they told me to stay away from her. They would never say why though, and it was just sort of a flat warning, I guess you could say. That was the first time that I felt like there was something bigger going on, but I pushed it into the back of my mind, and almost a year later, out of nowhere, she messaged me on a new account. It started off with small talk, but within minutes it turned into graphic, uncomfortable questions. She invited me to her house again, and she told me that there were new things that she could show me. The whole tone was off, too desperate and too rehearsed. By then, I had been burned enough times to trust my gut, and I blocked her immediately, but it definitely stuck with me, and I couldn't stop thinking about the one time that we'd hung out away from school. It had been a park not far from her neighborhood, and we were walking on a path lined with trees when I noticed a car creeping along the road beside us, slow enough to stay parallel. Two men inside were staring. No phones out, no casual smiles, and just watching us. She stiffened instantly. She kept stepping between me and this car, subtly pushing me away from it with her arm while saying under her breath we should leave. "Don't come to my house." She repeated it a few times, eyes darting toward the car. I hadn't understood why at the time. I just remembered the sick feeling in my stomach as I left. But not years later, that moment feels like a puzzle piece that I didn't know how to place at the time. Not long ago, I learned that one of the accounts that she had used was actually reported for child exploitation. That was the same account that she had used to message me, and it makes me think about how easily that night could have gone differently. If I had followed her home, or if I had accepted one of her offers to show me things, if I'd hesitated instead of leaving. I still don't know if she was trying to lure me or trying to protect me. Who knows, maybe a bit of both. Maybe she was caught up in something herself and trying to keep me from stepping into it. Every now and then, especially late at night, I still replay that all in my head. The car, the men, her tense voice telling me to leave like that. I guess I'll never know exactly what was waiting on the other side of that decision, but I do know that something was off, way off, and that I was lucky to walk away that day. I'm 24 now, but this started about 3 months back when I moved into a basement-level unit with my partner. He's on the overnight shift at a warehouse 2 towns over, so most evenings it's just me, the glow of the TV, snacks, and our 2 cats pacing between the couch and the kitchen. I've always liked the quiet, though, even at night. It felt private and safe. Well, until recently. It started as little things that I didn't even think twice about. A window in the den left cracked open when I was almost certain that I'd closed it. The latch on the garden gate flipped the opposite way. A small kitchen chair nudged out from the table. There were details easy to write off. Maybe I'd been tired. Maybe I'd just forgotten. Maybe the cats had been crazy or something and moved things. Then one night, a little after 1 a.m., I heard someone moving slowly along the outer walkway. Our building only has 4 units and a single shared entryway, so at first I figured that it was just a neighbor. But when I looked through the peephole, there wasn't a neighbor. There was a figure standing almost flush against the doorframe, hood up, head angled down and motionless. I couldn't see a face, and they weren't knocking, they were just sort of not saying anything and just standing there and breathing. After what felt like maybe a full minute, they then moved off, and my heart was sort of panicking, I guess you could say. I didn't even open the door until morning, and when I finally did, there was a folded scrap of paper jammed under the welcome mat. Just my first name on it. No note, no handwriting that I recognized, no message, and just my name. I tried to tell myself that it was just some sort of bizarre prank. My boyfriend brushed it off at first too, until he noticed deep scratches along the edge of the deadbolt, marks that definitely had not been there when we first moved in. We picked up a cheap security camera from a big box store and stuck it above the door for everyone to see. 2 nights later, at 3:07 a.m., the camera recorded someone trying the knob. Same hood, head angled down, and they jiggled the handle for at least half a minute, then backed off when headlights swept past from the street. We obviously filed a police report, turned over the footage. The officer just said to keep things all locked up and to call if it escalates. We upgraded to heavier locks and a door brace as well. For a couple of weeks, everything went quiet too. But the quiet hasn't been comfortable, I guess you could say. Every tiny sound makes me sit up and become alert. Even the cats pause sometimes and stare at the door like they're hearing something that I'm not. What's been eating at me the most, though, is just how calculated this whole thing feels. Whoever it is clearly knows when my partner leaves and when I'm alone. I've scrubbed my socials, stopped posting anything about my schedule. But the tension in my own apartment, it hasn't gone away. The other night too, at like 2 a.m, I woke up to what sounded like the faint click of our back latch, the one that leads to the shared basement laundry area. I stayed frozen, staring at the ceiling, telling myself that I was just imagining it, that I was just anxious from everything that had happened. I've started setting my phone on my video with the flashlight pointed at the door before I sleep too, just in case. This is the first place that I've lived where I feel like the walls are sort of closing in on me. It's not just fear of a break-in that worries me. It's the creeping sense that someone already knows more about my habits than even I do. I used to look forward to nights alone, but these days I count the hours until dawn. I don't talk about this much, but back in late 2014, my then partner and I drove up the coast for a weekend at a small, out-of-the-way sort of campground just outside of Fort Bragg. It wasn't a busy site, a scattering of old redwoods, a handful of fire pits, and a few tent pads separated by brush. The whole place had this sort of hollow, forgotten feel to it. And when we arrived, there was only one other occupied area within sight of ours. Off to the side of the main loop sat a narrow, pale blue pup tent wedged between two leaning trees. It was the kind of ultra-light camping tent that you'd use if you were hiking solo, I guess. Barely big enough to crawl into, but just enough space to make do. What unsettled me even before we unpacked, though, was just how stripped the setup looked. No cooler, no fire ring, no lantern, no food bag hanging from a branch or anything like that. Not even shoes or a bag outside. Just that zipped tent and nothing else. We tried not to think about it, though, and went about our evening. We built a small fire, made dinner, and were in our sleeping bags before 10 p.m. Not long after we zipped our tent up, something started, though. It wasn't music, it wasn't a group of campers. It was like a low rhythmic murmur, like a chant or a recited phrase almost, drifting out from where that little blue tent sat. It didn't rise and fall like normal speech. It had a sort of pulsing pattern, almost like a metronome. My first thought was that maybe someone had fallen asleep with a meditation app or a recording playing. But it kept going, and then the same staccato string of syllables looped without a break, with no breaths in between or anything. At points it grew louder, distorted, then dropped back to a whisper, only to swell again. It had a human sound to it, but at the same time it felt completely off, like an imitation of a voice, rather than an actual person speaking. I whispered to my boyfriend, asking if he heard it too, and he did. We both lay there, stiff, listening. By midnight it was still going, and by 2 a.m. it hadn't changed. It had that sort of recorded quality, but if it was a recording, who was out there alone, in the dark in a half-empty site, playing this just over and over again? Every time that I thought about peeking out, something in me resisted, though. The tent's fabric glowed faintly from our headlamps, and beyond it was just blackness and that endless murmur, like somebody chanting in a language that I didn't understand. When pale light started creeping through the trees again in the morning, the sound was still there too. We packed up our gear quietly, skipping breakfast that morning, and walked our stuff to the car instead of making 2 trips. As we backed out of the site, I glanced once at the little blue tent. The zipper flap was open now, but inside was completely empty. That image has stuck with me for almost a decade now. A stripped-down campsite, a voice that wasn't quite a voice, and the realization that if it was a person out there, that they'd chosen to spend the whole night in the woods, repeating or playing back whatever that was. Sometimes, too, when I think back in that moment, I wonder what we would have seen if we would have had the nerve to unzip our tent and take a look. When I was a kid, most of my weekends and school breaks were spent in a small riverside town, one where my grandparents lived. It was one of those places where the air always smelled faintly of wood smoke and river mud, and where the same handful of kids rode their bikes up and down the cracked main street every day non-stop. My cousins and I, we were inseparable then, exploring the woods behind my grandma's house, skipping stones, and always sneaking candy from the tiny shop at the corner. At the edge of the neighborhood, just past the little park with the rusting swings, stood a building everyone called the Hall. It had once been a community center, the kind that hosted dances and bingo nights decades ago. but by the time that I was old enough to remember it, it was really just a husk of itself. Its roof sagged inward, paint peeled from the siding in long scabs, and the tall windows were nothing but jagged gaps lined with grime. The doorway, it had been sealed with glass at some point, but the panes were shattered, leaving only a crooked frame now. Graffiti covered nearly every inch of this place too, and even during the daylight, the hall gave off a sort of heavy stillness. It wasn't just creepy, it was the kind of place where sound seemed to die sort of mid-air. My cousins refused to go anywhere near it too. I used to bike circles around it alone sometimes, peering through the empty windows and imagining ghosts or old band equipment left behind. Years later though, when I was about 14, a friend of mine, Mark, came back from abroad for the summer. He was older, taller, and way more daring than I had ever been. And on one sweltering evening, bored and restless, we rode our bikes down to the park and stopped in front of the hall. "Let's see what's inside," he said. I wanted to say no, but the challenge in his voice sort of hooked me a bit. It was just after sunset. The street lamps in that part of the town were few and far between, casting thin cones of light that didn't quite reach the hall. We leaned our bikes against a tree and crept up to the doorframe. Broken glass crunched under our shoes. Inside smelled of damp wood and old smoke. We flicked on our phone flashlights. Trash was strewn across the floor everywhere. Rotting sleeping bags, torn up flyers, empty bottles. Strange markings that were not quite graffiti as well ran along the lower walls in sort of looping strokes, as if someone had been scribbling with charcoal. The layout was bizarre too. Corridors led back into other rooms but curved around in sort of tight loops, so you'd end up right back where you started without meaning to. We whispered without realizing it. Every step sounded too loud. I remember focusing on the old stage at the far end, imagining how people once danced there, and then suddenly, Mark was gone. The beam of my phone jerked wildly as I spun in a circle, but there was no Mark. My chest went cold and I hissed his name louder and louder. From the darkness behind me, something lunged, hands grabbing my shoulders. I nearly dropped my phone, but it was Mark, doubled over, laughing at his own prank. Instantly, I started to snap at him, but that was when I heard it. A sound behind his laugh. A low chuckle, drawn out like a breath rasping through teeth. It was subtle at first, then clearer. It was not Mark's voice, and it certainly wasn't mine. I whipped my flashlight toward the far corner of the room, and there, a tall man stood, half hidden by a doorway, his silhouette thin and crooked. His hair hung in strings, and his face, or what little I could see of it, didn't match any adult that I knew in town. He wasn't startled by our lights, and he sort of just stood there, tilting his head, his mouth curved in what might have been a smile. I don't remember dropping the phone or grabbing Mark's arm, but the next second we were sprinting for the doorway, glass crunching under our feet and stumbling over each other. We jumped onto our bikes and pedaled so hard back toward my grandma's street that my lungs were literally burning when we got there. Later, lying awake on the old pull-out couch, I kept replaying it. We had been so quiet, and every step that we had took echoed. But how had he moved so close without any sound? And that laugh, the way it sort of slotted perfectly into Mark's as if mocking it. Even now, years later, I can picture that empty hall with the crooked corridors and the man in the corner, just standing there perfectly still, as if waiting for us to stop running. I'm 21 now, but this happened last winter when I was still working an overnight delivery shift. My route? It started before dawn, and I had to leave home at around 1:30 in the morning to make it on time every night. At night, The temperature had dipped below freezing and the highway was practically empty. The only open place between my apartment and the warehouse was a 24-hour rest stop with a single gas pump. It was about 1:45 when I pulled in. The whole lot was dark, except for the fluorescent strip over the pump, buzzing faintly. I drive a bright orange coupe with black stripes down the sides, the kind of car that stands out whether you want it to or not. So I'm used to getting looks, but I swiped my card, set the nozzle, and stared at my breath in the air while it filled. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed a white sedan pass by slowly on the road. Not unusual, but that stretch of highway is straight and empty. You see headlights from like half a mile off, but as I was about to hang the nozzle back up, I caught a glimpse of the same car's taillights flipping back toward me. That meant that they had just done a U-turn in the middle of the road. The hair on my arms, it went up. I hit the unlock button, slid into my car and locked the doors before even putting the cap back on the tank. The white sedan, it eased off the road and rolled right into the lot, pulling up next to my driver's side. The man inside, he leaned toward his passenger window and waved slowly. His face didn't match the friendly wave, though. It was flat, expressionless, like someone posing for a passport photo or something. He shifted around, reached into his back seat for something that I couldn't see. I remember the feeling of heaviness in my stomach at that exact moment. Every instinct screamed at me to leave right now. So I started the engine, and as soon as the sound of it kicked in, his eyes flicked to my car and then, just as smoothly, he straightened up, dropped whatever he had been fiddling with and steered away, heading back the way that he had come. For a second, I wondered if I was just overreacting. Maybe he had just been lost or something. Maybe he was looking for directions. But there were no other cars and no buildings open. Nothing at that rest stop but me. Plus, why make a U-turn at 2 a.m. just to pull alongside a lone car like that? Well, I didn't stick around. I floated back onto the highway, heart hammering, constantly checking my mirrors. The white sedan never reappeared behind me or anything, but I kept expecting it to. I don't stop anymore, really. Not even for gas anymore. I always fill up the morning before, so as to be around more people. I mean, maybe the man was just homeless, or maybe he wasn't. All I know is that the look on his face when he waved at me, it has stayed in my head ever since then. I grew up in a quiet fishing town on the northern coast of Japan. It certainly wasn't the kind of place where people swapped ghost stories for fun or anything. Old superstitions were treated as warnings, if anything, not entertainment. But there was one story, whispered by my aunt when I was 10, that refused to leave me. She didn't tell it like a campfire tale. She told it like it had actually happened, like she was warning me. The story goes like this. So there was a young office worker who had just moved from Tokyo to our town to take a job at the municipal office. He was quiet but polite, known for walking home late from the train station and bowing to his neighbors. One week, he stopped showing up to work though. He didn't answer his phone. His supervisors thought that he might be sick, so 2 co-workers went to his rented room above a shuttered restaurant to check on him. The man who opened the door was barely recognizable though. His skin had turned a grayish shade, his eyes sunk deep into his skull. He kept glancing over his shoulder as if someone was standing behind him too. The room smelled of mildew and stale sweat. The curtains were tied shut with string and every light bulb had been unscrewed, except for one dim lamp by the bed. One of the co-workers tried to break the tension with a bit of a laugh. "Hey, let's open a window," he said. "This place is suffocating." But the man stepped in front of the curtains like a guard dog and whispered, "I can't. She'll see me." "Who?" they asked. He didn't answer. His hand trembled as he pointed to the far corner of the room, a cramped space where nothing but a dresser had been wedged against the wall, leaving only a finger-width gap between it and the tall bookcase beside it. At first, they thought that he was joking. Then, leaning closer, one of them noticed what he was pointing at. There was a face there, a woman's face, pale and expressionless, wedged into a space far too small for a body. Her black hair was plastered to her cheeks as if she had been underwater. Her eyes were wide open, unblinking, staring directly at them. She didn't move. She seemingly didn't even breathe. The co-worker, upon seeing this, gasped and sort of stumbled backward, nearly tripping over the low table behind him. The other one whipped his head toward the corner, but the gap was empty again, just shadows. The man sat down on his futon, clutching his knees to his chest. "She's always there," he muttered. "If I look away, she moves closer. If I open the curtain, she follows me outside." His voice cracked into a laugh that wasn't really a laugh at all. The two co-workers left without saying another word after that. They didn't tell the police. They didn't call an ambulance. They just left him there because they didn't believe that anyone else would believe them. But by the following week, the room had been vacated and his belongings were all gone. No forwarding address, no resignation letter. He simply just disappeared. My aunt said that afterward, people who rented that room claimed to feel someone staring at them from the corner at night. A few even swore that they'd glimpsed a pale face between the wardrobe and the wall for just a heartbeat before it vanished again. Even now, years later, the image still haunts me. I've moved to a big city myself, living in a tiny apartment with barely enough room for a bed. But every once in a while, when I shift the furniture or catch a dark patch at the edge of my vision, I always remember that story and I get chills. I don't usually talk about things that have followed me my whole life. Most people think that you're just exaggerating or looking for attention when you mention ghosts. But since childhood, I've lived with things that cannot be explained away. Now I'm 24, a mother, and still trying to untangle what exactly happened. For now, I'll tell you about the place where it all began. Not because it's the only story, but because it's the one that still wakes me up at night when the house creaks. So, my family moved from Oregon to a quiet edge of the desert town in Nevada when I was about 9. The house was a big 2-story construction that still smelled of fresh paint and new carpet when we moved in. There had been no previous owners, no history, nothing. My parents thought that it would be a clean slate, but it turned out to be anything but that. The strangest thing about that house wasn't just the flickering lights or the cold spots, which are pretty typical of these sorts of experiences, I know, but it was how it began changing me. You see, I'd never slept-walked before, but suddenly it started happening, and not at home too. It happened whenever I stayed the night somewhere else. Friends would tell me that they'd woken up to find me pacing their kitchen or stomping down the hallways for what felt like an hour, eyes open but not awake. One parent even asked me to get it under control. Obviously, I couldn't. And back at our own house, things happened that my parents saw too. We had an old family computer downstairs that my sister and I used to play The Sims 3 on. At night, we'd hear the game start up on its own, and the theme music, the clicking of menus, all of that. It wasn't in sleep mode or anything too. Someone or something was actually playing it, it seemed. My mum or dad would storm into our bedrooms, thinking that we had snuck out of bed and were playing it. But we'd all be in there, half asleep and just sort of listening. Then they would go down and find the game still running, menus flickering as though an invisible player was controlling it. If it had been only that, maybe we could have laughed it off, but then there was the night of the light. My parents had driven back to the house to grab some clothes for my sister and me while we stayed at our aunt's one time. As they pulled into the driveway, my mother noticed the light in my bedroom was on. She was always obsessive about switching off lights, so she asked my father why it was burning, and he swore that he'd turned it off. And just then, as they were talking, it seemingly flicked off by itself. They parked, my dad took a baseball bat and went in to check the house. When he came back out, though, he was pale as a ghost. Nobody was inside. My bedroom light was off, but a different room's light, one that you could only see from the other side of the house, was on instead. That same night at my cousin's, I slept-walked again. My cousin said that she saw me moving in circles through the kitchen and the hallway, and she apparently said my name. I stopped, stood in the kitchen staring at her. She went to the bathroom and came back, and apparently I was still there. My sister later confirmed that she had seen the same thing. And to this day, I don't know if it was just coincidence or if whatever had been in our house was sort of borrowing me, I guess you could say. In any case, the scariest moment, though, happened later. By then, I was in 7th grade, and I had started closing my bedroom door at night. I had been editing a Vine video, you know the craze, on my laptop when I heard heavy footsteps in the hallway. My mother texted, "Is that you?" and "Be quieter." I texted back, "No." I looked toward my little sister's room, diagonal to mine, and I swear to you that I saw a tall, dark shape standing over her bed. It was leaning slightly as though watching her breathe as well. I told myself that I was just imagining it, turned over to face the wall, but something compelled me to look again, and now the figure was in her doorway, angled toward me. I quickly got up and shut my door, and the footsteps started up again, louder, stomping down the hallway and thudding down the stairs. My mum and sister heard it too, and my mum opened my door, pale, and asked, "You heard that, right?" Then, as if on cue, the computer downstairs started going crazy. This time, none of us went down to turn it off, and after that, I wouldn't sleep without my door closed. But even closed doors didn't always help. One night I woke up to a scratching sound in my closet. Yeah, that was terrifying. At first, I thought it was one of the cats, but we always locked them in the laundry room at night. I sat up, realizing that both my closet door and my bedroom door, which I had shut before sleeping, were now standing wide open. In the darkness of the closet, too, I could see a shape that was sort of crouched low. I instantly yanked the blanket over my head, absolutely petrified. A moment later, something pressed down on me, heavy as a person, squeezing the breath out of my chest. When it stopped, I grabbed a pillow and I went to sleep in my mother's room. Even daylight didn't seem to protect us because one afternoon, while my mother was chatting with an old friend at the kitchen table, my little sister's tablet, which had died from lack of battery, suddenly turned itself back on somehow. At the same moment, the chair that she had been sitting in scraped backwards on its own, as though some invisible force were pulling it out. My mum and her friend stared at each other in disbelief and shock. Then, as if mocking them, the chair slammed back into the table. They both instantly ran outside to where we were playing and told us what had happened. And it didn't stop in that house, too. Weeks later, we were staying at that same friend's home when all the cabinets and the drawers in the kitchen opened themselves while we were in another room. My mum thinks that something may have attached itself to her old friend and has been with us ever since, but I don't really know anything about that. Well, eventually we left Nevada for California. My dad got a new job and my parents thought that moving into his childhood home would be a fresh start. That house had some of its own stories. The town was like built over old tribal burial grounds or something, and I felt it the first night that I slept there. It must have been around midnight when I heard whispering right in my ear, then something cold brushing my cheek. I sat up, but there was nothing. When I lay back down, it happened again, and that was when I saw something too. A figure peering at me from the foot of my bed, sort of half hidden as though it had been waiting all along for me to notice it. Now, I could go on and on with all of the experiences, but my guess is that you guys get the point. I'll have to stop here because my baby's awake and I need to get on with my day, but sometimes I wonder if we did bring something with us from that new house in Nevada. Or maybe that's how the house simply was in the first place and it just decided to show itself or something. What do you guys think, though? Do you think that something dark has followed our family across state lines and for years now? Or is it just coincidence that we've just sort of shaped into a bit of a story? I would like to know what you guys think, and if you can give me any feedback on how to get rid of these things, then I would be very grateful. People often assume that all old house ghost stories sound the same. Creaking stairs, flickering lights, whispers in the walls. But the story my great-aunt used to tell us didn't feel like a bedtime tale at all. It wasn't passed down to us as folklore or embellished with time or anything. She swore that it was an event that she lived through, one that she still refuses to talk about at night. Back in the 1960s, when she was barely 20, she rented a small country house on the outskirts of a New England village. The building wasn't a crumbling Victorian, but a neat, modest cottage recently refurbished. The locals said the property had bad luck, apparently. According to a rumor, a caretaker or something had died suddenly there a few winters earlier. Whether by accident or by choice, no one could say for sure, but that's what happened allegedly. My aunt didn't believe in spirits, but she remembered how neighbors would glance at the house as they passed, as though checking it was still standing almost. Most of the strange occurrences were minor, I guess you could say. Cabinet doors left open, drafts in rooms with no windows, lights dimming slightly, then returning to normal, things that you could explain away if you really wanted to. But one particular night refused to fit any explanation. So, the cottage had a bit of an unusual layout. Off the main bedroom, there was a narrow sunroom lined with shelves for potted plants and all that, with a glass door that led into the garden. In winter, when the plants were moved out, the room always stayed locked, and there were two barriers, a door from the bedroom into the sunroom and a door from the sunroom out to the garden. My aunt kept them bolted at all times and would check them every so often. This night, though, was deep January. Snow had been falling for hours and she was alone, wrapped under a quilt, but no matter how many layers she added, she just couldn't stop shivering. She said that the cold felt like it was inside of her bones, not like a draft, but like the temperature itself had dropped just around her bed. She tried reading, tried humming to distract herself, but the cold persisted, until she drifted into a shallow but uneasy sleep. At first light, she woke and instantly froze in place. The door to the sunroom, which she had definitely locked, it was now stood wide open. Frost glittered across the threshold and her breath clouded the air. She sat up slowly, realizing the floorboards at her feet were damp. When she stepped out of bed, she saw them. Wet footprints stamped into the wood, tracking from the sunroom right up to the side of her bed. The prints were bare, human, and unmistakable. But when she peered into the sunroom, the door to the garden was still shut, locked and rimmed with ice now. No sign of a break-in, no open windows, and no melting snow anywhere else. Terrified, she called the only neighbor that she trusted. He came over and examined the doors, the prints, the lock too, and nothing was forced or anything. No footprints outside in the yard leading up to the door, just the ones coming inside and seemingly stopping right beside her bed. She left the house within the week, and she really never spent another night there. In retelling it years later, she'd lower her voice and say the same thing every time. Something was already inside with me. It didn't come from the garden. I don't know if she believed it was the rumored caretaker, something older, or simply a nightmare that left condensation patterns on the floor or something. But even decades later, she would still refuse to sleep in any room with an attached glass porch or greenhouse. So, I'll ask you guys, if you woke up to find footprints inside of your locked room, prints that started at your bed instead of ending there, how would you ever convince yourself that you'd been alone? I cannot find an explanation for this, and neither could she all these years later, which leads us to believe that someone or something was with her that night. So I'm not a paranormal believer by any means. I grew up on ghost stories, but I never bought into them. My first instinct, as with most people I guess, is always to find a logical cause. Still though, I've told this to a few people now, and nobody's been able to give me an answer that really sits right. This was March of 2024, Glen Affric. Me and two mates had decided to go wild camping for 4 days, hiking during the day and setting up in different spots each night. The first day was pretty much uneventful. Dinner, some whiskey, laughing under the stars, stuff like that. By 9, we had all gone to bed after a long day of hiking, and we had 2 tents. Mine, a 2-person that I used alone, and theirs, a 3-person that they shared. The running joke about this at the time was one of them had pulled the short straw because he had skimped on food and had to bunk with the other guy. It was just after I zipped myself in, too, that the weirdness started. 10 minutes of stillness, then faint movement. Someone or something stepping lightly around my tent. Not loud enough to be boots, but not soft enough to be wind either. I told myself that it was a deer. I mean, this part of the Highlands teems with them, and I've seen several earlier that day. But the sound circled closer, and it was deliberate. I was lying in the center of the tent, bag to my side, boots at my feet, when suddenly the inner fabric bowed inward at my neck, and something touched me. Not a scratch, not a brush, but a grip, firm as a handshake, but not painful. 2 fingers, maybe 3, and human-like. I froze in place and my breath went shallow, waiting for more movement, a voice or anything, but nothing came. The pressure vanished and the fabric snapped back, and I didn't even hear retreating footsteps. I stayed like that for what felt like a long time, then whispered my friend's name, trying to keep my voice steady. There was no answer. I tried again louder, and finally from the other tent a muffled groan. They had been asleep. I told myself that it was just whiskey-induced nerves. I'd only had a dram and a half though, but still. I tried to settle down. 10 minutes later though, my mate yelled out, his voice cracking in panic, and he swore that something had just done the same thing to him, touched the back of his neck through the tent wall. I crawled out of my tent and into theirs without hesitation after this, and all of us stayed awake a long time after that, huddled in the shared tent, whispering theories. None of them fit, obviously, and we saw no shadows, heard no retreating steps, no zips undone or anything, and yet we had both felt it. Well, we didn't get any sleep that night, but the next morning was bright and calm, and we checked the area. There were no tracks near the tents except for our own, and we really didn't find anything. Thankfully, over the next 3 nights, nothing else happened. We hiked, we cooked, we even joked about it. But at night, when the others fell asleep, I always kept one eye open, just waiting for another brush of fabric. Like I said, thankfully it never came. Now, at first I thought that maybe one of the lads was just playing a prank, but they're not that good at keeping a straight face, and whatever had touched me had done it once, not fumbling or feeling around as if to guess where I was laying. It was precise and deliberate. My working theory is that a gamekeeper or maybe a poacher was wandering through and decided to just scare us off. We did see a few gamekeepers later in the trip, but I don't know. I cannot reconcile the way that the grip felt. Like a hand, but not warm and not heavy. Like a pulse or maybe pressure or something. Plus, we never heard a single footstep leaving. And look, I'm not saying it is paranormal, but I'm just saying that it was weird. It's been months and I still haven't got a satisfying answer for this. If anything, the part that bothers me the most is just how intentional it felt. Like something knew exactly where I was lying in the dark and wanted me to know that it was there. I don't know. I might have been able to have dismissed this if it was just me, but the fact that my friend also experienced this, something was off, and again, I don't know how to explain it, but it was weird. People sometimes ask me why I hate staying overnight in other people's houses. I usually just sort of laugh it off, but the truth is that there's one night that made me swear that I would never do it again. This was about 5 months ago. I was 19 then, and our home was under heavy renovation. My room was downstairs, directly next to the construction area, so my parents suggested that I crash at my grandmother's place for a few nights. It seemed like an easy enough solution, and my mother even warned me before I had left that Grandma wouldn't be home. She'd gone out of town for the week to visit an old friend, so I basically would have the house to myself, which was great. But when I got there, she was home. I remember standing in the doorway, suitcase in hand, sort of staring at her. She looked normal enough, same cardigan, same gentle voice, but something about her face just seemed, I don't know, a little bit off or muted, I guess. Like someone was trying to mimic her expression but missing the small details. I asked why she was back so early. She smiled and said that she had cut her trip short because she wasn't feeling well. I remember that her tone was sort of flat, like she was reading off of a cue card almost. Well, the evening passed uneventfully. I microwaved some leftover soup, watched TV in the living room, scrolled on my phone. She had gone off to bed early and the house was quiet except for the old pipe sticking. It was around 9 p.m. and I nodded off on the couch eventually. I woke up just before midnight to the vibration of my phone. It was a call from Grandma. Confused, I answered. Her voice was warm, familiar, and normal, and she told me that there would be workers coming at 8 a.m. to install new blinds, and that I would need to unlock the door for them. I asked why she couldn't let them in, and she sort of hesitated a bit. Then she said, "Sweetheart, I told you already. I'm out of town until Sunday." Upon hearing that, my blood literally turned to ice. I hung up and just sat there listening. The house was silent, except for my own breathing. Upstairs, a floorboard creaked. I grabbed my bag and I ran to the front door, fumbling with the lock. That was when I heard it, her voice again from the hallway behind me. Only this time it was much lower, almost like something was playing her voice and it was slowed down. What I heard was, "Honey, where are you going?" Then footsteps. Not the measured shuffle of an old woman, but heavy and quick, slamming against the floorboards like someone was running barefoot. I literally yanked the door open and bolted to my car, and as I backed down the driveway, the upstairs curtains shifted. A tall black figure was pressed against the window, its outline wrong for a person, but The head was tilted, shoulders way too narrow. I didn't stop driving until I finally reached a petrol station about 10 miles away. My hands were shaking and I was hyperventilating. I couldn't put my card into the slot. When my real grandmother called the next morning to check in, she sounded perfectly fine. She had never left her friend's house and had no idea what I was talking about. People, they like to tell me that it must have been a dream or sleep paralysis or maybe even a terrible prank. And I mean, maybe it could have been those things, but I know what I felt in my hands when I turned that lock, what I heard behind me when the footsteps started. I know what I saw, and I spoke to my grandma for hours that afternoon. I don't know how to explain any of this, but I sure as heck have not gone back to that house ever since. "15 years ago, on a family trip to the US, I saw something that I still cannot explain. And my dad, he saw it too. We were doing a low-budget road trip from Las Vegas to Southern California to visit family and friends. At one point, near the end of the trip, we decided to drive to San Diego for the day and grab dinner before heading back. It was one of those outdoor shopping districts, rows of restaurants and stores clustered around fountains and street performers. It was crowded but not chaotic, dimly lit by warm string lights, the smell of fried food and sea air drifting together. But we were tired, hungry, and in a line of about 10 people, waiting for a table at a busy restaurant. I was at the back of the queue with my dad. He was holding my little sister, and I remember sort of absent-mindedly watching people drift by. Tourists, locals, teenagers with skateboards. And that was when I noticed him. He didn't appear out of like thin air or anything. He was walking toward us from across the plaza, but it was like my brain only registered him once he was already close. Stocky build, dark shorts, bright mustard yellow t-shirt with some unreadable design, 2 shopping bags, one in each hand, like he had just come from a grocery store. Nothing too unusual, until I looked at his face. His eyes, they were completely black. Not like dark brown or dilated pupils or anything, but totally black. No iris and just voids. It was so out of place that for a second I thought it was just faint pace or maybe novelty contacts. But the longer I stared, the less it looked like a costume and the more it looked like absence. Like you were looking into 2 holes punched through a photograph. He walked straight up to my dad, close enough to touch, and started speaking. His voice was calm, measured, almost like he was reciting something. I felt a surge of adrenaline suddenly, like I was about to be mugged, and I could see my dad shift his stance too, like he was getting prepared to fight this guy or something. We had both done martial arts for years, but neither of us had ever just known someone was dangerous before like this. Yet, this man had both hands occupied with shopping bags and we still felt threatened. He didn't look threatening, I guess, apart from the black eyes, obviously, but my whole body was telling me that he was. The first thing that I caught clearly was a question. Not like an internal question that I was asking myself, like the difference between man and humankind, but something stranger. "Do you know," he asked, "what separates a shadow from a person who casts it?" I was locked onto his mouth, trying to hear every word that he was saying, but it was like the air between us was sort of dulled or something. His voice grew indistinct after that, even though I was straining to listen. I caught fragments, like not what you think. Skin is only a suit. Most people never notice, and it was like he was broadcasting straight at my dad and not at me. Somehow, my dad could hear his voice, but I was only catching glimpses. And here's the weirdest part. nobody else around us seemed to even notice him. Not my relatives, who were just a few feet away, not the people in line behind us, not the servers standing by the door. We weren't off in a corner or anything, mind you. This was a crowded outdoor plaza. But suddenly it felt like a bubble had been formed around the three of us. The sound dulled, like I said, and even the breeze felt a bit different. My dad told me later that he felt the same thing, that something was off about time almost. He also said that the man's voice wasn't just speaking to him, but through him, like it was echoing in his chest or something. At one point, the man looked at my dad and said quietly, "I'm not here to harm you." Then he turned his head toward me, and for a split second, the blackness of his eyes sort of glinted. Not like light hitting a surface, but like a whirlpool reflecting sunlight deep underwater. I swear that I saw movement inside of them too, like a spiral. Then, without another word, he stepped back, the bubble popped, the noise of the crowd came rushing back, waiters calling numbers, kids laughing, music from a nearby speaker. The man turned and walked into the dark end of the plaza, and within a few seconds, he was gone. The hostess called our party to a table at that exact moment. Me and my dad sat down, both pale and both silent. Nobody else in our group had seen the man or even noticed the conversation. My dad kept rubbing his palms together and finally whispered, Did you see his eyes?" I nodded. "Did you hear what he said?" He shook his head slowly. "Not all of it, but I heard enough." We tried to piece it together, but we just couldn't. We still bring it up often 15 years later, and every time it's like remembering a dream that you're certain that you were awake for. I've read about black-eyed kids and urban legends, but this was not a kid. This wasn't even quite a man, I would guess. Whatever he was, he knew exactly how to reach us and exactly when to leave. Sometimes I wonder back about that day and I ask myself if we met an alien or something like that. Other times I wonder if it was like a shared hallucination or something. I still have no idea what that was, and I know that this sounds completely crazy and just bizarre, but it is what happened. And if it wasn't for the fact that my dad heard it and saw it too, I would genuinely believe that I was going crazy. I'm a teenager, and it's just me and my mum in the house with our two dogs. This is a story from last winter, but I'm sharing it on here because it's starting to show up again, and my mum even started seeing it again as well this time. So last winter, it was around, I want to say 12 in the morning, and like I said, I'm a teen, so I'm awake at night a lot doing my own stuff. I was by myself, and I started hearing some banging in the kitchen, like cups falling. This is not my or my mum's first time with spirits speaking, and I grew up in an extremely haunted home, and it got so bad that we had to move from there. But I heard the cups, and I'm usually not the person to investigate, but nothing weird had happened in a while, so paranormal activity didn't even cross my mind. I opened my door and peeked out into the hallway, and I see what looks like to be my mum standing in the corner of my kitchen. I had the view of her back, but what was really strange is that she was completely butt naked. This looked exactly like my mother, though. It had her body figure, her hair, her sun tattoo above her tailbone, everything. Obviously, I was thinking, why is my mum standing naked in our kitchen at 12 in the morning right now? And this person, or whatever was so visible that I literally thought that it was my mother, it was there for a good amount of time, just not moving at all. It's one of the worst encounters in my life, and it still freaks me out to think about it. It wasn't shadowy at all, and it was the most visible thing that I'd ever seen. All the lights in the kitchen and the living room were on as well. So, thinking it was my mum, I just said the word mum. I was confused on what the heck she was doing. And then I hear from my mum's bedroom next to me, that's right across from my room, my mum's voice says, "What?" It was from her room, with her door cracked open. The last split thing that I saw before I just literally launched into my mum's room was it turning around. I didn't see its face or anything because I bolted into my mum's room freaking out. I'm usually used to seeing freaky stuff like this because, like I said, growing up in an old haunted house and all that. But this was just so different. I was in tears freaking out. My mum got a crowbar or something from under her bed and went out to see if anything was there, and whatever it was gone. I slept in my mum's bed that night. Now, this is where my mum's story comes in. About 2 days later, I was still so freaked out by what had happened that I was literally still sleeping in my mum's bed. She is still freaked out by the story as well and doesn't ever talk about it, but she did tell me once that it happened because it scared her so bad, I guess. She said that she woke up in the middle of the night and her bedroom door was cracked open and the hallway light was shining into her room a bit, which was strange because she shuts the door every night. She then says that she looked over on my side of the bed on her left and saw what looked exactly like her, again naked, crawl into the bed with us on my side of the edge of the bed. My mum couldn't move and she said that it felt so real. It was facing the opposite side of her, facing the wall, laying on its side, and she couldn't see its face yet. She said that she could move her hand and she was trying to shake me awake in tears, but I just wouldn't budge. Weirdly though, she said that she doesn't remember anything that happened after that, but she was scared out of her mind all day once she woke up. Apparently she must have passed out or something. And when I first heard this, I thought, well, maybe it was sleep paralysis. But still scary as heck that she saw exactly what I had seen, right? Plus the fact that it had only been a few nights before that. Sometime after that too, we would swear that we would see her for a split 2 to 3 seconds standing in random places in the house. Usually her doorway, or sometimes in her room too. Whatever the thing is, it really doesn't wear any clothes, which is really strange, right? We hadn't seen it since the winter left, but now it's back, and really I don't know if it has to do with it being around Christmas, because that's when weird stuff started happening, well, where we used to live anyway. It was always around October, and it would always get worse until around Christmas. But we hadn't seen this lady at our old home, and my mum thinks that maybe it's her fault because when she was in her 20s in college, she used a Ouija board with a couple of college friends and had a terrifying experience where it had a connection with her, is how she describes it. Let's just say that it got so bad that the words no on the board wouldn't burn in the end. And all her friends who did it, they still have weird stuff happening to them as well. I won't go into that story, but if you guys would like, I can ask her about that and see if she would like to share it here. I'm just sharing this story because yesterday morning me and my mum heard scratching on our carpet from the hallway when we were the only ones home. And it certainly wasn't our dogs because they were sitting in their beds 2 feet away from us and we could see them. Same morning too, my mum proceeds to tell me that she has seen the naked lady again, but only for a split second, but she swears that it looked like her. I personally am just terrified that I'm going to run into her any minute at night again. But what do you guys think it is, and is there any way to get rid of it? So we live in a house my grandparents bought in the late 90s. The house itself is probably a lot older than that, but both me and my mum and my grandma are convinced that it's haunted. And we also think we know who it is. It's my uncle, I'm pretty sure. He died in 2006. He had a 4-year-old son at the time and I was 5, so I don't remember him very well, but he was a really nice man, but struggling with substance abuse. I don't know if that matters in why he's here or not, but anyway, we've always just heard things, I guess. Walking upstairs when we're alone, stuff like that. The stair here is the most obvious, but as I said, the house is getting pretty old, so you can hear when someone is walking up and down the stairs. And really, you can't mistake walking for something else like wind or a draft or whatever. But today, I was in my room upstairs when my mum and stepdad went to bed. The bathroom in their bedroom is on either side of my room, so I heard my stepdad get into bed after brushing his teeth. Then I heard my mum brushing hers in the bathroom. Suddenly, though, I heard someone walking down the stairs. I figured that it was my stepdad. My mum heard it too and thought that it was me, so she called out my name, and when I didn't answer, she called out my stepdad's name and he replied a yes from the bedroom. We all were pretty confused by this, but then my mum texted me asking if I just went downstairs, and I said no. Then I heard her getting into bed, and seconds later we heard someone walking down the stairs again. And she texted me asking if I'm just messing with her, and I said no, that I swear that I'm in bed. So my stepdad, thinking that there is a possibility that somebody had broken in, he walked downstairs to check it out. Once I heard him walk back upstairs, I looked out my door. The stairs are just outside of it, and I see him disappearing into his room. But I saw the top of someone's head walking down the stairs, and I heard the footsteps again. Genuinely, I thought that it was my mother at first, since I didn't see a hairstyle or anything. It went by too quickly to notice, but I just saw sort of like dark hair, I guess you could say. I went to the bathroom and texted my mum, "Do you see anyone downstairs?" And she just replied that she's not downstairs, she's in bed. So I asked, "Oh, it's stepdad who just went downstairs." And she said no, he's already been downstairs and checked. No one should be down there. And that instantly gave me chills. But since it's been a history of sounds, open cabinets, doors slamming shut, etc., I wasn't too scared to see it, I guess. I walked downstairs, my flashlight on and a broomstick in my hand, just in case it was actually an intruder. But I checked everywhere, and I can assure you that there was no one there. I checked every possible place that I could, and there was no one at all. I must say that I'm a bit freaked out too, and it is kind of creepy to actually see something. But I guess what I'm asking is, why? Ever since 2006, things have just happened here a lot. Almost every week there are doors that slam shut, despite there not being a draft, lights turning on, cabinets being opened, footsteps down the stairs. Why can't he move on? Can we actually help? I don't think that this is a case of a bad spirit or anything. I don't know a lot about, well, any of this, but it's 3:30 in the morning, so please don't scare me in the comments under this video if you have any answers. At 18 years old, I was arrested for armed burglary. This landed me 2 years in the Florida Department of Corrections. After going through the processing center in Orlando, I was transferred to Lake Butler Correctional, a medical secondary receiving center in Central Florida. Upon arriving, we were placed in a building known as the Honeycomb, a giant structure in the center of the prison covered in cinder blocks facing sideways, making it look like a giant bee's nest. We were assigned 2-man cells, classic bars and correctional officers patrolling, flexing and talking tough in deep southern accents. As anyone who has done time will tell you, everyone has a story to tell in there. Whether it's rumors about guards, inmates, epic tales of past crimes, or legends of paranormal experiences, you are guaranteed a new one with each wave of new arrivals. Naturally, none are believed, but they're definitely still listened to regardless. And one was the whispers. The story goes that at 3 a.m. in the disciplinary dorm, aka the box, a spirit will torment inmates at night, whispering to them as they sleep, and if you wake up, you will see nothing, but you'll feel a presence in that cell. If you lay back down and ignore the whispers, supposedly, you will be injured in some way, shape, or form. Nobody I spoke with had ever been in the box at Lake Butler. Most inmates have never been in there, as most people in the honeycomb were usually transferred to their main prison in a week or two. I was one such unlucky man, though. You see, I had gotten into a fight with two gangsters who were trying to collect protection money from non-gang members such as myself. Naturally, 3 men fighting is not a silent scenario. The guards sprayed us with mace, put us in cuffs, and dragged us to the disciplinary wing. I was given 2 weeks solitary confinement and told that if I was to cause any more trouble that I would have my new sentence tripled. Now, 2 weeks alone with nobody trying to take your food or act tough sounded pretty easy to me, to be honest. In my mind, this was going to be a cakewalk. I still shudder though thinking of just how wrong I was. The first 3 days went without incident. I did my morning workout, ate my breakfast, slept in for a few hours, wake up, eat my lunch, practice my art, read a few chapters of my book, eat dinner, work out again, and finally pass out until morning. This was my decided routine that would get me through the next 2 weeks, until the 3rd night. At first, I genuinely thought that the guard was trying to get my attention for something, so I rolled off the bunk and came to the door, waiting for the slot to pop open so that he could speak. It was then, though, that I could have sworn that I heard whispers. They weren't coming from my door, but behind me. I turned, seeing nobody in the pale moonlight coming through the 4x12-inch window at the top of my cell. But clearly the solitude must be getting to me, I thought, as I shuffled back to my bunk. Now, like I said before, I had heard the stories, but I never believed any of it. Ghosts, demons, angels, and all that just sounded like ridiculous kid stuff to me. As I laid in my bunk, though, I just couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. It's not a totally uncommon feeling really in there, as there were cameras everywhere, officers doing regular checks every 15 to 20 minutes, but this felt like someone was in the room with me. But it's not like they had anywhere to hide. I mean, I just had like a toilet sink combo, my desk bolted to the wall with a concrete pillar for a stool, and then my bunk. A quick scan was all I needed to see that I was actually alone. Yet, I still could have sworn that I felt a presence in there. This feeling had me awake now. Lockup had developed instincts in me that refused to let me go back to sleep. Adrenaline was coursing through me as my eyes shifted trying to pinpoint a source of these sounds. First, I swore it was coming from the door, then it shifted to my toilet. When I looked under my bunk as if someone was right near my ear, I heard, "You're not even close." At that, I shot up, searching frantically for someone. I ran to the door and started pounding, calling for the guard. Nobody came at first. Then I heard footsteps heavy storming down the hallway. "What's the issue, inmate? You better be dying in there if you're slamming on my door like that." "Dude, there's someone in here," I said through the door. "Can I move to another cell? I swear I'm not messing with you." "Them ghost stories got to your head, boy, huh?" "This isn't funny, man. Please, you've got to move me, sir." "I'm not moving you. Go to bed before I come in there myself and knock you out." All I heard was his boots dropping heavily down the hallway back to his office. But after that was it. Nothing else. The whispers were gone. Not even the cicadas outside were buzzing now. I let out a breath I didn't even realize that I'd been holding in the whole time, and I just kind of mentally smacked myself out of it. That guard was going to tell everyone about the kid losing his mind last night after 3 days in confinement. I just made a spectacle of myself for nothing. Feeling foolish, I laid back down and passed out. The fear having taken its toll on my body, I was out like a light in seconds. I was awoken that morning to a loud noise in my cell. 3 guards were standing over me, looking even more ticked off than I'd ever seen them. "So, you think you can just throw a temper tantrum on our watch?" yelled the guard from last night. "What are you talking about?" I asked as a large hand came across my face, knocking my head into the wall. "You're going to clean this cell up top to bottom, alright? And be sure to save all the toilet paper because I'm not giving you another roll till next week," he bellowed. I looked around and all of my property was strung about the toilet paper everywhere, and my locker door dented as if someone had kicked it repeatedly. The pictures I had been sketching were ripped up and tossed like confetti, and one of my pens had been busted open with a message written on my desk saying, "See you later." I cleaned up the mess and sat there, my head reeling. How had I even slept through all of that? How had someone gotten into my cell? What the heck happened last night? I sat there just stunned until my shower time when the guards came and cuffed me to take me there. "See, man, look what all that fuss you made last night did. You went and hurt yourself," said the guard as he followed behind me. I looked at him questioningly. "What are you talking about? That line on your back, you idiot. What happened? You catch yourself on the bunk or something? I wasn't there the other day." I turned, and in the reflection of the glass, I saw it. One large scratch mark running from my upper right shoulder to the middle of my spine. And then after that, everything just suddenly went dark. I woke up in the infirmary an hour later. The nurse was demanding a confession from the guard. "We told you no marks. What happens if internal affairs were to show up and see him like this? He didn't look like this when I went over him after the fight a few days ago. You could lose your job over this, you know that?" She then screamed, "I'm not covering for you." It was then that I sat up. "He didn't do anything to me," I said as I shook the fog from my head. "See? I told you I didn't do anything. He just passed out on the way to the showers." "Is that true?" asked the nurse. Yes, ma'am." I then turned to the guard, relief washing over his face. "Can't I just move cells, sir?" "No problem. Just promise to act right from now on, alright?" "Yeah, sure. Deal." And that was my first paranormal experience ever and turned me into a complete believer. To this day, I have never come up with an explanation for what happened to me that night, nor do I wish to go back and investigate, that much is for sure. Since my release, I have never been arrested again and I quit all drug use. I'm now a functioning member of society, I guess you could say. I also have a family now and 3 beautiful children. I work 50 hours a week and play with my kids every day, and do my best to direct them on the right path. And so far, life has been pretty good. This happened when I was 12, and it was only me and my mum in the house, as far as I knew anyway. So I had said goodnight to my mum, went to my room, turned out the lights, and I'd gone to bed. I was lying on my side about to fall asleep when I felt a cold hand touch my lower back and I just completely froze. Then I felt my mattress compress behind me like someone was getting into my bed. I've never been that scared in my life. I couldn't move, not even my eyes. I was just staring at my bedroom door, praying my mum would come to check on me. I tried to scream, but I could only manage a kind of groan, and I couldn't tell if it was loud enough for my mum to hear it. Then, the thing behind me started slowly stroking my back and whispering shush. I have no idea how long this went on for. It might have only been like 5 minutes, but it felt much longer than that, and I felt completely helpless. I tried to groan as loud as I could, and finally I heard my mum's footsteps coming down the hall. She opened the door and poked her head in, and as soon as she looked at me, she screamed. Her scream jolted me up, and I started screaming too and flailing my arms around trying to fight off the intruder. My mum turned on the lights, grabbed me and hugged me, and started saying that it was okay. I looked around and there was nobody else in the room. I asked her where it went, and she didn't know what I was talking about. I said the thing in my bed, and she said that there was nothing in my bed. So I asked her then why did she scream, and she said that she came in because she heard me groaning, and when she saw my face, my eyes were crossed and my mouth was hanging open, and it scared the heck out of her. I told her what happened, and she was really disturbed by it. We looked all around to make sure that nobody was hiding in my room, and finally, she decided that it must have been some kind of waking nightmare. But I'm sure that there was something there. I've felt dark presences and seen shadowy figures many times since that night, and this was really the beginning of it all. So we live in southern Arizona and are all staying the night at one friend's house for a birthday party. Her house is known between all of us as the haunted house since we're always experiencing weird things there. But this time, right after the sun had set, we were sitting on the porch in the backyard when one of us yelled and pointed at the chest-high brick fence, saying that she just saw a bald white human head poke itself over the fence. Two of us immediately ran over and looked over the fence to see nothing. We laughed that off, but it was the first sighting of that night. You see, we hung out a little bit longer outside until we decided to check over the fence again, and while we were doing so, we heard scuttering on the outside of the fence out of view. We joked about it, but we also went inside after this. Skip to a little while later, we went outside again, and almost right away, someone saw a head pop up around another fence. Again, we all thought that it was really nothing, but more of us started seeing a head, hands, and part of a back. At that point, we were scared and started going back inside when one friend stayed back and scared the living heck out of us, but she was just standing and looking. We stayed there for a while, now with one friend holding a broom. They lost their broom privileges soon after this, by the way, and we kept seeing small things of white and some of the same things from before. Our other friends, previously inside, they came out again, scaring the heck out of us again, and we all started talking about things that we saw, and also what it could be when we kept seeing things. But eventually, two people heard a growling sound, and it was very clear that they were both freaking out and they weren't faking it. At that, we all ran inside and started panicking, trying to reason with the fact that there was a skinny, bald white man crawling outside somewhere in the dark growling. We ended up just locking all the windows and the doors and double-checking everything, and we stayed indoors for that night, went outside the next day and looked around, but we never found anything. So I've always been very open-minded to the idea of the paranormal, but I very much believe that there is usually a logical explanation. We've been living in the same apartment for 3 years now, and until about 2-ish months ago, everything had been, well, really pretty normal. But in about the last 2 months or so, we both have been experiencing odd things. So, I know for her, what she has told me has been the uneasy feeling of being watched when alone and seeing shadows. The really odd ones to me, though, are the noises. She said that she heard kind of loudish bangs, like something heavy hit the floor in another room a couple of times. I too have seen some shadows out of the corner of my sight and such, but nothing I would say is definitely paranormal. My strange experiences have been like one night, I was at home and going to bed early while my fiancé was out. I went into my kitchen and closed the door, and I got into bed. And as soon as I laid down, the bedroom door just flung open, really hard and really fast. I sat up and just stared at the doorway to see if I saw anything, but it seemed like nothing was there. One evening a few weeks after the bedroom incident, I've had zero odd experiences in this time frame, but after getting home from work, I was loading the dishwasher. As I was bent over loading the bottom rack, I felt what was like a warmth on the back of my neck for a split second before it felt like a huge spider was crawling from the back of my neck to the bottom of my head. I freaked out, obviously, for a second, but there was nothing there and really everything was normal. Then, a couple of days later, I was doing some baking and I loaded the cupcakes into the oven. I set a timer on the Google Hub and I went to the living room couch to relax while I just waited for it. I was just browsing through Reddit on my phone and I briefly saw what looked to be a black silhouette of the top half of a head peeking around the corner from the kitchen with the hands gripped around the corner like it was holding onto it. At that, I dropped my phone and got a solid second of eye contact with it, and then my timer went off and it just vanished into thin air. My fiancée bought an old book that belonged to someone like decades ago that she believes from a bookstore in LA when we went on a vacation in the beginning of October, and she thinks that that book is either cursed or haunted. The book was The Ghost of Mystery Airport by Van Powell. There's no dates on the book, but there is an old sticker of a child in very outdated clothes, 1930s I would guess, on a tree, and it says My Book at the top and Buzz Pitkin at the bottom. Outside of that, though, we have had no new things bought or changed. We had some neighbors move in about a month ago, and we recently found out that my fiancée is about 6 weeks pregnant too. Personally, I think it's just stress and a lack of rest from both of us, and maybe we're just fueling paranoia or something. My fiancée is pretty firm that it's something paranormal, and I figured that I would try my chances at asking the kind folks here what their thoughts or opinions are on this, as we both lack any real knowledge of the subject of the paranormal, and could really use some help. On November 25th at 4 a.m., I woke up in a panic. I've been having sleep paralysis this whole month, in fact. It happens every November for me and whenever I'm stressed. This time was different though. You see, I woke up and was able to pull out of my sleep paralysis fairly quickly, but I felt this intense feeling of something staring at me with deep hatred. I sat up fast and looked around my room, something that I never do. Usually after a sleep paralysis episode, I dig deeper into my covers because, well, it's frightening. But this time I felt scared and also in danger. And when I did this, at the doorway of my room was this 8 to 10 foot tall thing. It had a goat head, I don't remember seeing horns on it, and a gorilla body. I grabbed my phone and turned the flashlight on and shined it. I didn't feel brave enough to shine it at its face, but I illuminated it enough to see its body and a bit of its face. I saw enough and I screamed, a long scream too. To be honest, I purposely screamed for a long time so that my dad would come and save me, embarrassing as that may be. Luckily, my parents live with me and my dad did end up barging into my room. He stayed at the doorway for a second, scanning my room, and then ran in. When he ran through the demon-looking thing. It grimaced when my dad walked through it, and it disappeared. My dad, he ended up hugging me for a bit before we had a bit of a sleepover in the living room with the cats. I know I'm a 30-year-old female and way too old to have my dad hugging me to sleep, but that thing looked absolutely frightening and I was really glad that he was there. My dad, he's nearing 60 now and is very into Catholicism, to almost an extreme extent, as he grew up seeing what his grandmother had to go through as a curandera, a village healer. He says that he sees a lot of ghosts and demons too. He always has his prayer music on. He wasn't always like this, but he always said that he could see the supernatural, but wasn't religious before this. He got into a really stressful situation a few years ago, and all of this magnified to where it is now. To be honest, I thought that this was all just religious psychosis. I'm not religious at all, as the Catholic Church traumatized me growing up, and honestly, I was really hoping all these ghosts, shadows, demons that I was seeing was just an overactive REM cycle, or just my mind filling in the blanks. But this goat head gorilla body thing, it just looked so real, and it freaked me out when the flashlight didn't make it go away too. Also, I was awake when I saw this thing as well. I should also mention too that a year ago when I first got into my house, I fell asleep on the floor of my room because I didn't have any furniture yet. I fell asleep to some frequency sounds, and during the night, I must have skipped over to another video or something. The video was a picture of a priest praying with a Bible at a group of people, maybe demons or something. It was a reddish picture from what I can remember, but the sound was a priest chanting an exorcist prayer in Latin. This didn't wake me up, but what did wake me up was something that tapped my foot twice. I woke up and heard that chanting, and it obviously spooked me, and so I turned it off. I was hoping that the tapping was just a nervous tick, like my foot twitching or something like that, but now I'm wondering, well, what about that experience too? Was that also something paranormal or something to that effect? If you have any thoughts on this, then I sure would love to hear them. Currently, I live in the Canary Islands, a place where UFO activity is pretty common. Over the years, various stories have been told, and there's even some evidence of giant orbs around Mount Teide, our volcano and highest mountain in Spain. There's strange metallic objects flying over the sea, tales of diggers coming face to face with supposed grey aliens, and anecdotes of mysterious lights under the sea near coastal towns and cities are pervasive. I want to talk about the latter though. You see, when I was 10, my whole family and I went on a vacation to Tenbel, a sort of resort area in the south, home to dozens of hotels, rental vacation homes, old tourist complexes, and even a very old, almost abandoned vacation development. To give you some context, at that time, Tenbel was already nearly deserted, despite once being a bustling place. The area is located in the most arid, desert-like part of the island. My sister and I used to joke that it looked like the neighborhood of Strangetown from The Sims 2, because it was exactly that, a place in the middle of a dry, forgotten zone. Today, it still has little activity. There are tourists, but not like before. The place gives off desolate vibes, especially because many buildings are old and crumbling. One of those buildings was where my family and I would spend most of the summer, an enormous apartment block straight out of a Soviet-style design from the 80s. This building, it was next to a rocky beach and a small mountain, which was often climbed by British and German tourists. For some reason they loved it, but from the balconies of our apartment, you could see the black volcanic rocks and the sea, and it was a beautiful view, let me tell you. At the time, I shared a room with my sister and her boyfriend, so sometimes we stayed up late playing board games or just goofing around. Now, one of those nights, I remember going to bed early since we had spent the whole day hiking and swimming in the apartment complex's private pool. I recall waking up to a strange light sweeping across our room repeatedly. Annoyed, I thought it might be my sister with her phone or her boyfriend messing around. The room was dark, and a breeze from the balcony made the silk curtains flutter, something that was quite refreshing in the summer. From my spot, I noticed my sister and her boyfriend standing on the balcony, staring at something. My sister clung tightly to him, which was unusual for her. She's always been the brave one. The light swept through the room again, this time dimmer. At first, I honestly thought that it might be thieves with a flashlight checking balconies for witnesses, but then I realized how silly that idea actually was. So I got up and approached them to see what they were looking at. "What's going on?" I asked, annoyed. My sister turned slowly, almost in shock. Her eyes were sharp, like a deer watching a predator. "There's something strange in the sea," she whispered. I thought that she was joking, so I chuckled and looked where they were staring, and to my surprise, there was a pulsating light, like beacons, flashing on and off randomly. I figured it was from a fishing boat, but the light wasn't coming from the surface. Whatever it was way underwater. I could see the greenish-blue water and the shadows of large submerged rocks near the light's surface. "A submarine?" I asked. "It's right next to the shore, though. The water isn't deep enough for one to navigate there," her boyfriend replied, mesmerized by the light show. The lights started to fade, slowly moving further out to sea. Moments later, a final burst of light shot upwards, created a visible beam that extended into the sky, and then it just vanished, and we never saw it again. We spent hours talking about what had happened. I remember feeling scared. I had never experienced something so strange. But what frightened me the most was seeing my older sister's terrified expression. I knew that if she was scared, it had to have been serious. To this day, at 24 years old, I still think about that night. It's burned into my memory. My sister has tried to forget it. She just doesn't want to think about it, or even hear it mentioned. In 1991, I was 6 years old and my family, mum, dad and sister, had moved to a different part of town. Better schools, nicer area, that kind of thing. It was certainly an upgrade from where we were moving from. The house stood out from the other houses in the neighborhood. It was the only two-story house in the neighborhood, in fact, and the foundation noticeably sat up higher than the surrounding houses too. My dad had learned that when the neighborhood was being developed and the land was being leveled and flattened, that they would move up with a big mound of excess dirt, so they basically just built a house on top of it. It was a tri-level house with a 2-car garage, family room, half bath and closet on the lowest level. After living there comfortably for 10 or so years, my parents decided to combine the half bath and closet into a full bathroom. To do this, we had to jackhammer through the concrete foundation to add or move plumbing for the new shower that was going in. Keep in mind too that context is speculative, given that there's no way to know if doing so had anything to do with what started happening almost immediately after we remodeled that bathroom. I guess it's always just felt that way to me and my family. So, the middle portion of the house was kitchen, dining room, and living space with 3 bedrooms and a bathroom at the top level. Within days of the remodel, late at night, my dad's stereo system turns on in the living room while everybody is asleep. I was the first one to wake up, so I went downstairs expecting to find my dad rocking out at like 2 a.m. for some reason, although he's definitely never done that before. Though he was and is quite the audiophile, so I don't know. You never know, right? But as I'm getting down the stairs, not only am I realizing that it's some random late-night radio playing, but there aren't even any lights on. I just remember turning on a lamp and going over to the stereo cabinet, turning off the receiver, and just standing there like, what the heck? I was the only one who woke up as far as I knew, but I had a feeling my sister, 14 at this time, was pulling a prank. But when I accused her of doing it the next morning, she was not having it. My parents brushed it off, considering that they never heard anything either. Well, this would keep happening. I'd say probably 8 to 10 more times in the following couple of months, in fact. The same thing would happen every time as well, always in the middle of the night. Stereo would come on and the volume would slowly go up until someone ran downstairs and turned it off. There were times that I'd gotten way too loud before someone made it downstairs as well, and this particularly frustrated the heck out of my dad, because this stereo system was his pride and joy, and he was afraid that the speakers were going to get damaged. My parents, of course, thought either my sister or I were doing this, but before we had even fully convinced them that it wasn't us, other things started happening too. For example, I was standing in the upstairs shower washing my hair one time, and as I'm facing the back of the shower wall, I see a shadow sweep around the whole shower. Of course, I pull the curtain open expecting to see my sister or someone messing with me, but no one was there, and the door was locked too. There were a lot of shadow incidences just like that too. Now, from the living room you can see upstairs to some degree, and we would often see out of the corner of our eyes what would seem to be something quickly crossing the hallway from one room to another, like you would just barely catch a flash of something when nobody was up there. Touch lamps would come on by themselves often. My dad said on multiple occasions that he'd be laying awake having trouble sleeping, and the touch lamp on the nightstand next to him would just come on by itself. Most notably, my close friend and my dad described seeing the exact same person in the house. In fact, they both saw this person while doing the same thing, which was walking into the front door when nobody else was home. Probably a year or so into these occurrences, my dad got home from work one day, opened the front door, and saw a young girl around my sister's age standing at the top of the stairs that would take you down into where the remodeled bathroom is. He said that she looked about my sister's age and had similar blonde hair, wearing a light blue dress with a white collar. As soon as he saw her, she bolted down the stairs. He went over there, checked the whole downstairs, upstairs, everywhere, but no one was home. A friend of mine not long after that would do the exact same thing. We got home from school. I threw him my keys to open the door because I was carrying stuff. He walked in the front door and saw the same thing that my dad saw, described the same hair, clothes, everything. I wish the story got juicier from here, but ultimately we just sort of adapted to it, I think. It was a little spooky at first, but once we realized that it was just a young girl, we were so used to it anyway that it was almost comical. Things kept happening up until the point that I moved out at 19, and the house was sold about a year later when my parents would divorce. One other interesting detail too is that the guy who bought the house did so as an investment property that he planned to rent out. And I cannot tell you how many times I've seen that house being sold or going up for rent over the past 20 years since then. So, did we release the ghost of a young girl after breaking through the foundation? Perhaps a grave was among the mound of dirt that the house was built on. Did something nefarious happen, or was it just an annoying glitch in the Matrix? Regardless, it's always been fun to speculate, but truly, I would love to know. My friend recently explained to me that he woke up in the middle of the night because he thought that he heard footsteps coming down the hallway, and he's alone in the basement. The barn door to his room, it's locked from the inside with one of those cheap swinging metal latches. But he hears that latch fling open, and the barn door slammed across the slider and even dented the wall. Then he describes this short, skinny human with huge eyes, and said it looked somewhat similar to Gollum from Lord of the Rings. Weak, short, huge eyes, pale, bruised skin. And this thing walks around the corner into his room, and as soon as it passes the drywall that was blocking his view, he said that he and it made eye contact for a second, and the thing lunged at him while he was in bed, in his underwear. He describes kicking this thing away, and at first the thing would just sort of keep coming back until eventually he kicked it so far that it was out of view, blocked by the wall from his point of view, and the thing just disappears. He then says immediately afterward, this 8-foot-tall, skinny, all-black humanoid thing crawls out of the ceiling. He says that it began walking in circles on all fours above his bed until, after less than a minute of doing so, crawls down the wall that is past the end of his bed and then stands up at the end of his bed. He said that when it stood, it was as tall as the ceiling, standing at the small space between the end of his bed, the wall that it crawled down, and the wall-mounted TV behind it. The creature, it lunged at him. He described a similar thing with kicking it off and fighting with it until he kicked it into a wall and it disappeared. I'm pretty sure that I was sleeping when he called me just after this, obviously terrified and confused, telling me all about what had just happened and how he wasn't sure if it was a dream or not. Yet weirdly, he said that the door was open, and he said that he called me right afterward and didn't remember waking up before he called me. Now, we're almost certain that it was not a dream to some extent, as 1, the barn door is like 100 pounds on a track and cannot move on its own weight. 2, the latch was on the inside with horizontal pressure. It needs vertical pressure to open. 3, the wall was dented afterwards, like I mentioned earlier. 4, he doesn't remember waking up other than when he heard footsteps in the hallway. And 5, events like this began to happen frequently after this until, after months, his mum experienced clearly hearing people in the house when she was home alone. Is that coincidental? Well, we don't think so. I lived in a modest apartment on the top floor of an old building, with nothing above me but a dusty attic. When I moved in, I thought that I was finally escaping the chaos of my old shared place. The neighborhood was quiet, my neighbors kept their distance, and the attic overhead felt, well, reassuring to be honest, like a buffer between me and the night sky. I think I first noticed something strange one evening as I was drifting off to sleep. In the silence, I heard cautious footsteps directly above my ceiling. The attic was supposed to be sealed off, so I told myself that it was probably rats, maybe a stray cat, and I should do something about that. But the next night, at the exact same time, the footsteps returned. Soft creaks, the sound of fabric brushing against wood like a body trying to move silently. Feeling uneasy, I questioned my landlord, and he insisted no one has accessed that attic for years. It's locked and empty, probably just the old wood settling. I wasn't convinced, so I propped a chair under the attic hatch. It was secured with a heavy rusted padlock, and yet the following night, I woke to a gentle groan of hinges. The hatch had shifted. The padlock still hung there, but slightly angled, as if it had been opened and carefully put back. My heart hammered so violently that day that I felt dizzy. The next morning, I bought a small camera and positioned it high on a wardrobe, aiming it at the hatch. That night, the noises came again, subtle and measured. At sunrise, I replayed the footage with trembling hands. The hatch, it had lifted a fraction, and a pale, grimy hand had emerged through the crack, groping in the darkness as if searching. Not an animal's paw, this was unmistakably human, which meant that somebody was up there, suspended in eerie silence, watching me sleep below. I called the police immediately. They promised to send a patrol and urged me to leave the apartment, but it was late and the idea of stepping into the night honestly felt worse. I grabbed a kitchen knife. I barricaded my door and sat on my bed trembling and listening. Around 3 a.m, that was when I heard a scratching sound, this time beneath my bed. My blood turned to ice. The attic was above, not below, so how could anyone be under my floorboards? I pressed my ear to the wood, and the sound repeated. Something or someone was crawling, slithering into a space that really shouldn't exist. I remembered reading that the building once had another level that was later sealed off. But could there be a hidden crawl space, just large enough for a desperate, deranged person to nest in? I wanted to run, but fear held me in place. Suddenly, the noises crept toward my front door. I heard it strain and creak as something tried to force it open. I dialed emergency services, voice shaking, pleading for help, and they said that the patrol was close and told me to stay calm. Then the pounding on the door stopped. Silence. Agonizing minutes passed until the police finally arrived. They searched my apartment thoroughly, but there was nothing. The hatches were closed, no sign of a break-in. I was half crazed, begging them to check the attic. Finally, they forced the lock, and inside, they found old boxes, scraps of food, a filthy blanket, and also what seemed to be my name carved into a beam. Tacked to a wall were candid photos of me as well, taken from outside of my own building at different hours. The officers, they looked really unnerved at this. They found no alternate exits, no tunnels, just a cramped space that honestly reeked of stale sweat and something sinister. I fled that same morning into a friend's place, and the next day I returned briefly for my belongings. And that was when I discovered that in my mailbox was an unmarked envelope. Inside was a single Polaroid. Me, standing in my living room that night before, talking to the police. The photo, it had been taken from inside of my apartment somewhere. Somehow, this person, he had outsmarted me, eluded the authorities, and watched me from every angle, above, below, through the walls I once thought were solid. I will never know how he slipped in and out unseen like that because I left. I'll never learn his name, but to the man who lurked beneath my floorboards and in my attic, if you ever hear this, know that I would rather lose my mind than ever meet you face to face. Don't ever come looking for me. Not ever. This happened to me in the early 80s when I was about 14 or 15 years old. So I lived on a quiet street in the suburbs of my city, in a small place that you wouldn't call the countryside, but close, in a Spanish island of the Atlantic Ocean. It was known locally back then that little girls started disappearing more often, but it wasn't yet a topic of conversation between the towns and neighborhoods. Most of my friends lived in the city, so I would often take the bus to go and meet them. That day at around 5 or 6 p.m., I decided to start walking to the bus stop, since I was going to meet my friend that evening anyway. The bus stop wasn't actually that far from my house, maybe half a mile in distance. It was located on a quiet street with a few cars or people around, and lined with old street lamps, and they always flickered even in the daylight. I had taken this route so many times that I didn't really think anything of it. When I got there, the street was dead and had no cars or nobody to be seen around, so I just stood up for a few minutes, waiting for my bus. A while later, a white van slowly approached my direction and started slowing down right next to the bus stop. I didn't think too much of it, like maybe they were just parking or looking for something. But then, 2 men got out and started walking towards me. One of them looked normal enough, but the other man caught my attention because his face was kind of, well, deformed, I guess, with one hollow eye socket where his left eye should have been. His other eye locked onto mine, and the intensity of his gaze made me freeze on the spot. Before I could even process what was happening, they had a hold of me.
One grabbed my arm with a grip so tight that it felt like my bones were about to snap, and the other wrapped his arm around my waist, dragging me towards the van. Neither of them said a word, although to be honest, their silence was worse than anything they could have said, I think. I started screaming and kicking as hard as I could, but there was literally nobody that I could see around. I remember I even started yelling, "Fire, fire," since my mum had told me that it was like a code for people who were getting abducted. It really was a horrible feeling seeing myself getting pulled closer to that van, knowing that I couldn't do anything to avoid it. They shoved me into the van, and as I landed on the floor, I saw a third man with a bandana covering his face, and a Doberman that was staring at me with a disgusting, creepy face that honestly still haunts me to this day. It was in that moment that I started to think that no one would help me or even hear me at all. I started struggling and fighting back, and I kind of managed to get them off of me for a second, but they kept grabbing me and pulling me back in. I also remember this distinctive metallic smell inside the van, like rust or maybe blood. I felt like probably the luckiest person on earth when, out of nowhere, my older brother showed up. He didn't live with us at the time, so coincidentally, he was probably visiting us that day. I don't really remember why he was there, but boy was I thankful that he was. He started yelling and throwing punches at the men. In the struggle, they let go of me, and I managed to pull myself free and back away. The men seemed to be caught off guard, and after a few seconds of fighting, they ran back to their van, slammed the doors, and sped off. Right after that moment, we ran home, and I started crying in desperation. The walk home was hard, since my legs were shaking non-stop. I felt overwhelmed, and I couldn't really process what had just happened to me. People who have experienced something similar to this, you know how shocked and paranoid you start feeling after it. And well, we reported it to the police later that night, but really they didn't do much. Things like this just weren't taken very seriously back then, unfortunately.
So my name is Mark. I'm in my early 20s, and I've always been fascinated by paranormal stuff, but I've never really been a believer, I guess you could say. It was sort of like an atheist studying a Bible type of situation, I guess. But I did actually happen to personally experience some weird stuff in my life, and I do believe that my room was haunted on 2 occasions, maybe. So the first time was when I was 11 and my sister was 9. But when my family was slowly moving to a new house and renovating it, a set of white walls, no furniture, me and my sister, on many occasions, were allowed to explore our new neighborhood. Once when we got back from our exploring trips, we just sat in our empty room and threw ball to each other singing some random nursery rhymes. When we were just going at it for something over half an hour when suddenly a ball stopped midway to my sister and went back to my hand. I was freaking, she was too, and we refused to visit for a while after that. Small clarification too, it was like this little heavier dog-chewing ball and all the windows were closed, so no wind, and since the room was empty, there was no bouncing from something else. It was as if the ball just defied physics or something. As an adult, I actually spoke about it to my mum, suspecting that it may have just been a false memory or something. But she actually confirmed that me and my sister once really lost our heads over something like that, and even refused to sleep in our rooms for over a week, and it had made her really tired. Now, the next haunting, if you can call it that, happened 4 years later. This time I wasn't present, but it happened in the same room apparently, and I need to explain a bit about our room situation. So, I shared my room with my younger brother, 10-year-old at the time of this haunting or whatever, and my sister, she had her room next door. So, I and my brother went to my cousin's place to have a sleepover. Since our room was bigger and we had a bigger TV and DVD player, my sister decided that she wants to sleep in there. So she goes there, watches a few movies, and goes back to sleep. In the middle of the night, my fitness or stationary bike starts running, literally like someone was just using it. It was electric, but all the electronics were long overcooked and damaged. Besides those were trackers, and they were incapable of moving the bike like it was at this point. So my sister started screaming and she went to our parents' room. When we got back, she was absolutely terrified, and I actually needed to move to her room for a while since she refused to sleep alone at all. This story was also confirmed by our mother. Also, I remember sleeping in her room on my noble exile. There were no pets at that time in the house, and honestly, there was just nothing that should have caused this. Also, my sister still swears by it, and she really isn't someone to make something like this up. I do some volunteering at a hospital 3 times a week that involves me reporting to the hospital at 5 a.m. I enjoy the volunteering. I've been doing it for almost 2 years now, and I've really never had any issues. Until last week. Last week, I was a bit early on one of my volunteering days, and I had about 30 minutes before I had to report in. I normally would have just waited in my car, but I had been pretty stressed about things in my personal life, so I thought that I'd go for a little walk to burn a little steam and clear my head. After all, this is in a pretty nice area, upscale West Los Angeles, so what could go wrong? It's like 4:30 in the morning, so naturally the streets are all quiet, but it seems pretty peaceful. But then, up ahead, I see somebody walking in my direction. Kind of odd, I guess, but I didn't think too much of it. Him being out here at this hour isn't inherently suspicious, I guess. After all, does being out here at this hour automatically make me suspicious too? So, I keep walking. We make quick eye contact when we cross paths, and I suddenly got a very bad feeling about this man. I can't explain it other than an instant instinct, but sometimes you just have a gut feeling about somebody, you know? That's what I felt when I passed this man, and I immediately went on high alert and made sure that he wasn't going to approach me from behind or something. Very soon after walking by this man, I'm talking like 15 to 20 seconds, I passed by one of those many parked cars on the street. This is Los Angeles, so there's a lot of parked cars on the sides of the main streets. Except this parked car is different. There's a man sitting at the wheel, and the man waves at me and beckons me over. Again, pretty darn creepy, but not inherently worth freaking out over just yet. As I keep walking, I then realize that while the car was parked, it wasn't off. It was simply in park. Because this car starts driving in the same direction that I'm walking, and it drives at a pace essentially matching my walking speed, at this point, I've had enough, and my brain is saying nope. So I immediately turn around and start speed walking back in the direction that I came from. Then I saw something in that moment that absolutely terrified me. That first man that I encountered walking the other direction, which was probably like 40 seconds ago, was now standing pretty close to me, like way closer than somebody who had been walking in the other direction should be. And then he makes eye contact with me, and he starts walking in my direction. I am incredibly suspicious and more than a bit nervous at this point, so because it's pretty dark out, I decide to play a hunch. My car keys fold out in a manner very similar to a switchblade, so I immediately pull it out, press the button to make the key fold out, and I stare at him for a second. I believe that he was caught off guard because he stopped walking for a second. And well, that second was all I needed. I immediately took off running at top speed, crossed the street. We're talking a Los Angeles main street with like 6 lanes of traffic and a median divider, and kept running down the street. Now, I'm no Olympian, but I was on the cross-country team at a D2 college, and I still run multiple times a week, so I'm pretty confident that I can outrun the average person I run into by a comfortable margin. Still, I didn't take any chances, and I ran all the way back to the hospital. So, But what do you guys think? I'm not crazy, right? I'm not necessarily saying that I was going to be the next prominent murder victim or kidnapping victim, but there was definitely something going on here, right? So for the last 2 months, there's been some instances where I've woken up at around 3 or 4 in the morning to use the restroom and have noticed my daughter's door open after we definitely closed it when laying her down. We live in a smallish 2-bedroom apartment. Our daughter's room is directly across from ours, and we typically sleep with our bedroom door open so we can hear her in the night if she needs us. We usually lay her down at around 8:30 p.m. and my wife and I are usually in bed at around 10. Our daughter has a Nest White noise machine that we leave on in her room to help her sleep. When her door is shut, you can barely hear it. When I get up in the middle of the night, though, I immediately know that her door is open, just off of the sound alone. And then I look across and her door is not just open a crack, but completely wide open. I just have this eerie feeling. My wife and I don't sleepwalk, and when I'm up in the middle of the night, I'm pretty aware of my surroundings. Also, to add to this, our daughter sleeps in a crib and is way too small to crawl out of it, and usually when I notice her door is open, I always go and check on her, and she's always knocked out. There's just no reason why this door should be open, and I don't know, something is telling me that something is wrong. Anyway, I apologize if this sounds a bit rambling. It's just giving me weird vibes, and I was looking to see if anyone had any ideas of what might be going on. This happened about 2 years ago. Me, my fiancé, and my best friend decided to go to this popular hiking trail near us. The trail leads to a giant rock that hangs off of a cliff. It's a beautiful look over the city that I live in, and it's a far walk through the woods. You're on the same trail going straight for most of the hike. The trail eventually makes a sharp turn, gets thinner, and gets very steep. You really have to hike up this part though, and then you reach an open field. You can see the rock above you, and you have to climb up one more path that leads you to the rock. Now, even though the hike is long, the path is very easy and it's hard to mess up, considering that this is the only path in that area of the woods, that I've found at least. I've done it multiple times at this point, even hiked down well after midnight, after watching fireworks on the 4th of July. But anyway, the three of us decided, since we were walking close to the road that leads you to the trail, that we were going to go and visit. It was about 7 p.m, so it started to get dark pretty quickly. But we didn't even make it off the first part of the trail that I already mentioned. It goes straight for about an hour until you get to the sharp turn. We didn't even make it to that, and we decided that since it was getting dark that we should probably turn around. We all had our flashlights on and everything was normal. We never set foot on the path. The path is pretty much dark engulfed by the trees, but there is this one spot where the trees open up. You can see the entire downtown area of my city, and it feels very high up because this trail is basically in the middle of the hillside surrounding the whole town. If you've ever been to Pennsylvania, then you'll get it. Anyway, we got to the spot where the clearing is, where you can see downtown, but it sort of looked flip-flopped. I don't even really know how to explain it, but it looked like the town was sort of flipped, like how you can flip an image on your phone almost. Like someone took the town and flipped it the other way, if you get it. It was late and dark, and we were tired of walking, so I just don't think that we really took it seriously when we walked past it. I still felt the weird feeling though, and I felt like everything was sort of backwards all of a sudden. That's really the only way that I can describe it, as backwards. And we all said the same thing to each other. It was my fiancé who said something first, which is just weird because usually he'd be the last to say anything in a situation like this. All he said, though, was that he feels backwards. My best friend freaked out because she gets anxiety like that, and she felt the same way too. I mentioned the clearing looked weird at this point, and they all agreed with me. They thought the same thing, but they thought that they were being silly. At this point, though, we should be close to the exit, but honestly, it felt like we were sort of going in circles. path started breaking like the path wasn't even the same that we'd been walking on, so we turned back around towards the rock to try to figure out where we were. We came back to the clearing and it still looked weird, so we took pictures, and I do have them still if anyone cares to see them, but you wouldn't be able to make out that it looks flip-flopped unless you live in the same town. We knew that we were at the clearing though because, well, it's really the only part where the wood's clear like this, and we knew that we were on the right path as we've never got off of it. We decided to turn back around towards the exit, but it just didn't bring us to the exit. It also didn't bring us to the path that looked wrong and started to break. It was a whole new part of the woods, in fact, that we'd never even seen before. At some point as well, we sort of stumbled across a door on the ground. It looked like a door to a mine maybe or something. We tried to take a look at it, but there was no evidence of a mine being there. There are multiple mines in my city though, so I wouldn't be surprised if this was just an old one and wasn't on record or something. But beside the door was about 5 or 6 white chairs with what seemed to be white sheets laying on the ground around them, like a little piece of white cloth. Not very big, just pieces. There were also beer bottles. The chair was in a circle formation, but there was no fire pit in the middle or anything, just this circle of chairs. Looking back, it could have been a little campsite someone had made, but man, was it scary at night when you're lost to find something like this. It genuinely freaked us out, and every time we walked away, it just seemed that we just made our way back to the chairs and the door again. Obviously, we started to try to call and text people that we know for help, even called my parents, but nobody answered. It was late, so I guess that sort of made sense, but we were so lost and getting really scared, and we were going to have to sleep up here at this point, we thought. And eventually, after walking what seemed to be in circles forever, we just sort of walked out. Like, so fast the exit was right there, we just walked on the path for a minute and we were out, just like that. Almost immediately after we leave, I then get texts back from people that I was trying to get help from. And one more creepy thing, just to put the icing on the cake as well, is that there were like 1,032 pictures taken on my fiance's phone at 10:32 p.m, like a burst of them. If you have an iPhone, they have these things called bursts where you can take a lot of pictures quickly. It was just so weird. The pics were all just white and it just made no sense. It's also weird how his phone took pictures while he had his flashlight on at the same time. The pics were taken during the time that we were lost, and we didn't go back for about a year until me and my fiance decided to go back and try and find the path that we made it onto at some point, just for peace of mind in the end. But no matter how hard we searched, and I mean we searched pretty thoroughly to find this thing, we couldn't find the door, we couldn't find anything weird, no extra paths, no flip-flop of the city, except a giant meat grinder at one point. I don't know what that was about, but man, I hate the woods so much. It freaks me out thinking about any woods or forests of any time. That's just one of the worst experiences for me though, but I've had a few others, and honestly I just hope people don't think that I'm making this all up. I know that it sounds crazy, to me even, so I can imagine someone thinking that I'm lying, but I'm really just looking for a possible explanation for any of this. It's one of those things that just sits with me and bothers me to this day, and my fiance doesn't like talking about it either because there's just really no explanation. Me and my best friend, we still talk about it from time to time, but it just goes nowhere because we've thought of every possible explanation that we can think of. So, any similar experiences or theories would honestly be great. When I was 18 and freshly broken up with my older boyfriend, I basically went crazy with dating guys. At the time, I also dressed very goth, even going as far as to wear a real corset and trench coat, mostly just enjoying the attention. One particular afternoon, though, my friend or roommate at the time decided to eat at a local Japanese restaurant, with both of us all dressed up. Our waiter was a mediocre skinny white guy who clearly was a little alternative, but it was hard to tell really with the uniform. We joked about me leaving my phone number on the receipt or something, so I hyped myself up and I did it. Late that night, he had sent me a text at some point. We talked for a few days, never really having a right time to meet up as I worked 40 minutes away from where I lived. He mentioned the boots that he wore meant a lot to him and some other odd things that just seemed like edgy jokes, I guess. One really late night though, coming home, I was texting and driving, as any 18-year-old does, and we decided to meet up. I was stupid enough to invite him over to my apartment, where it was just me and the roommate who had been with me before. Our other two roommates were not at home at this point. At first, it was fine too, because I was already drunk, so I would just let him rant about whatever he wanted. He went on about his life, going to jail, medical bills, his parents, etc. Eventually, though, he asked me if I wanted to see his tattoos, and I was like, sure. He lifted up his shirt, and not only could I see the handgun tucked in his waistband, but also his multiple badly covered up racist tattoos. One was even slightly covered up with a banana. I don't know what it was, but I simply decided the best way to deal with this situation was just to appease him, so I went along with it casually. I don't remember exactly every detail because it was over 2 years ago and I was drunk, but he ended up pulling his gun out and putting it to my head, asking me if I was scared. I was immensely confused and I tried to call his bluff saying that I wasn't, which got him to put it away for a while. When we went to hook up in my messy room, he pulled it out on me again, saying that he wanted to do it with it out. I got mad and tried to fight him off and get it away from my head. Of course, I wasn't as strong as him, and he hit me in the arm with it. And I mean, if you've ever been pistol whipped with a gun, then you'll know exactly how much that hurts. When I finally got him off of me and he realized that I was angry, not scared, he started acting like a crackhead, saying that I was crazy for not caring about him pulling a gun on me. He ran off, jumping the fence of the apartment complex, and not even taking his car that he had come in. In the morning, his car was gone, and I had a large bruise from where he had hit me. And while to me it was a funny story for quite some time, I now realize just how bad it could have all ended. I was asleep with my small baby and woke up for some reason, 3-something in the morning, and I felt someone grab my foot. A coldish, larger hand grabbed the tips of my toes or the top of my foot. Well, I at first thought that I was dreaming and my feet were out of the covers, so I decided to just go back to sleep. I put that one foot under the cover, left the other foot out, because I like sleeping with my feet out, and I was almost back asleep when I felt a thumb with pressure slide up my foot, and then a hand grab with intense pressure the top of my foot. At that, I immediately shot up. My body was having intense reactions at this point, goosebumps, rapid heartbeat, etc. I yelled my sister's name because she's the only one who had a key to my condo, and I looked under the bed and everywhere in the room. I was terrified for quite some time after that, but it never did happen again. Until just the other day. So, I'm in a completely different city now with my husband and second baby. My husband, he left for work early in the morning at like 4 a.m. He said goodbye and I was half asleep with my feet out. And about a minute after he closed the door to leave, something grabbed my foot, the top of my foot, the same way that it happened before, but it was only once this time. I went to go and see if my toddler was in bed, and she was fast asleep. But I guess I'm just scared. I can't tell if this thing is bad or good or what it even actually is. I told my husband and he believes me, but he has no idea what it is and no good ideas to put forward. I guess I just really want to know what it is, and so if you have any ideas as to what I should do, then please do let me know. I live in rural southwest VA in Appalachia, and I heard odd whistling in the woods a few days ago at night. It all started when I was playing airsoft alone in the woods at about 7 p.m. in almost pitch black. Yes, I live a pretty lonely existence, and was walking around the woods behind my house. I got to a clearing on top of a hill and sat down to take a rest. Just when I sat down, I heard this odd whistling. It was perfect whistling, and whistled a tune that I'd never heard before. It was clear and it sounded close, at least within 150 feet or maybe even less, and came directly from behind me. It would have had to have been in the woods and near the property line with one of our neighbors. It instantly gave me chills down my back though, and I got the feeling of being watched. I, not being an idiot and having a brain, wasted no time in sprinting full speed down towards my house, hopping over rocks and limbs and all that. The whistling stopped shortly after I got moving, but I still felt like I was being watched and like something was just off. I didn't see anything when I did turn back to look while opening a gate, that is, but that may be because of the darkness and the distance that I had moved. To be clear as well, there was no way that it was a bird, as the leaves on the trees haven't regrown yet, and plus it didn't sound like one. It still stays cold at night as well, and sometimes during the day even, but I don't know that much about birds, I guess. What I will say though is that there were also no birds to be seen, and everything else was really quiet. I also sort of doubt though that it was a person, as I heard no talking, no leaves crunching, no other noises in fact. I should also mention the whistling started sort of out of nowhere, and it didn't get gradually louder or anything, as if someone or something was moving closer while whistling. I've been in those woods a decent amount of my life, and I've never heard anything like it before, not even once. I'll admit that I was a bit tired, but I've been more tired before while being up in those woods at a similar time, and I'm definitely not one to hallucinate or anything. The whole situation still gives me chills when I think about it. I've had the feeling of being watched before in those woods, but those feelings have never been so intense and extreme as that one night. I was sort of hoping if anyone might have known what this was, that they might be able to give me some feedback. Was it an animal? Maybe, but me and my family have dogs around the house, and most wild animals stay away. And I haven't really seen anything outside of a bear or two and deer in those woods. I should also mention the dogs occasionally bark randomly into the woods, but they weren't really barking at that moment when the whistling happened. And quite honestly, I was just sort of hoping that someone could identify what this was. I'm not saying that it was paranormal or anything, but I'm also not saying that it was just a wild animal. It was too weird to be just that, I think. Many years ago, when my daughter was potty training, a friend recommended that I keep a travel potty with me. It saved me from rushing to find a restroom and avoiding stopping in any way questionable with a toddler. We would drive about 40 minutes to pick up my husband on his lunch break, and that afternoon we were headed back to drop him off at work, and we're only about a block from the restaurant when my daughter said that she had to go. The area that we had just headed into, it was a large business park area with lots of very large buildings to the left and the right. I saw one and the parking lot looked empty. I pulled over to the side of the building and I parked at the curb. I had 2 car seats taking up my back seat and my husband in the passenger seat, so I took my daughter out of the car and sat her up in the trunk to use the potty. I just got her settled and she was looking uncomfortable and covering her face and looking down. I looked behind me and I see a woman walking up to me. It was summer at the time and very warm, but she was wearing a jean skirt and tank top and had a crossbody purse. She looked at my daughter and said, "Don't be embarrassed, we all go through it," and just laughed. She said that she needed a ride to the freeway and asked if I could take her. I told her that I was sorry, but I couldn't. And she started to seem bothered by that and asked why I couldn't take her. I said my back seat is full, so I don't have room for her. And she snapped back, "So you're telling me you put your daughter in the front seat?" I told her no, that my husband was in the front seat. And as soon as she heard that I wasn't alone and had my husband with me, she started to slowly back away, and she was walking down the street that she came from. As she was walking away, she said, "Oh, I'm sorry, I used to be from here, but not anymore," and quickly walked off. If she would have made a left on the cross street she was walking towards when going towards my car, there were restaurants and gas stations a block up, plenty of people to ask for a ride. So the fact that she went the other way has always troubled me. I still am very grateful my husband was with me that day. I don't know what her true intentions were, but getting to a populated area really didn't seem to be one of them. Back when I waitressed, I pulled into my mum's driveway at around 8 p.m, and I remember that I was excited because it was an early night for me and I'd been working 3 jobs at the time. The neighborhood was quiet and nobody else was really around, no cars driving by or anything. I was scrolling on my phone in my car when I just got a terrible feeling and a chill down my spine. Something was telling me to get out of the car at this point, so I got out and slammed my door when I heard this gut-wrenching scream. My first thought was that a raccoon was being eaten or a cat had gotten run over or something. I couldn't pin it, what it was, because it was just so disturbing. I'll never forget it though. It had so much pain and terror in it. I looked around me to find the source and noticed a figure across the street, standing in the grass next to the street curb. The street light was in front of my house, so I could make out some details. It was a girl with long hair covering her face and a long white dress. She had no shoes on. My first thought was kidnap victim for some reason, and I wanted to call out, "Are you okay?" but something inside of me told me to hold back. She didn't move or look up. I probably stood there a minute too long contemplating what I was seeing and if she needed help or not, but ultimately my gut told me to get inside, now. Without turning my back to her, I opened my garage door and I backed in, my eyes never leaving her, and she didn't move even an inch. I stood and watched as the garage door closed, and she was still there. I ran inside, turned on the house alarm, and ran to the front window to see if I could still see her, but I couldn't. Then I ran to my bedroom window upstairs because that would have been a perfect view of her, but she was gone. I slept with the lights on that night. My mum says the neighborhood kids were playing a prank on me, but honestly, none of them were her shape or size or looked like her. I've seen them all. When I told the story to some friends, some of them mentioned a banshee. While no one in my family passed away, I did have a near-death experience 3 months later. I don't know if it's related, but I think it's probably worth mentioning that. Anyway, I'm curious as to what others think. Was I just being pranked, or did I see something that night? And if I did, what exactly did I encounter? And more importantly, why? So my boyfriend, now husband, moved into this house with 3 of his buds when we were 19. Built in 1909, you could only expect it to come with some history, right? Well, his room was on the main floor, and I'd spent evenings over just visiting. I came over after work one day, and he was all worked up going, "I swear this house is haunted. I'm losing it." He explained that as he did laundry, the dryer kept turning off, and he would walk to the basement to find the door open. On his 3rd trip to the basement, he just snapped. He yelled and swore and told the ghost to get lost. He slammed the dryer door and then walked back up to his room. The laundry completed and the door didn't open again. After explaining this to me, I realized that it was already 11:30 p.m. and I had to drive home still. He was a bit on edge, but I just told him that he needs to apologize and understand that this was probably their home at one point in time. They're just messing with him for a reaction. I kissed him goodnight and walked into the kitchen towards the front door to leave. I stopped in the doorway, felt the need to look over my right shoulder, and see the elements on the stove beat red. They were all turned on at full heat and had been on for a while, clearly. The kitchen was really hot. The stovetop itself was dang hot. I casually walked over, turned off all the elements and said, "Please stop, he's harmless." Boyfriend begged me to stay and I was like, "You gotta fight your own battles. You need to apologize and just go to sleep, you silly goose." The old man never left. It was his house at one point. He made certain everyone knew that he was still the boss. I sometimes enjoyed his tricks. I ended up moving in with the boys 3 months after the stove incident. Nothing too scary ever really happened. Just sort of regular ghost stuff, but it was kind of like Casper, I guess. Some people might find that odd, but I guess when you've had your fair share of paranormal encounters, things like this just don't seem to faze you anymore. So I was driving home at about 9:30 p.m. My route contains a variety of areas, including some single-lane, quiet roads. Driving along one of these single-lane roads, I end up having to slow down because of a man standing in the middle of the road, facing away from my car. Now, I have my full beams on at this point, so there's no way that he doesn't know that I'm driving behind him. He apparently just decides to wait until I've come to almost a complete stop before turning around. Just turning around, that is. No sign that he's going to move out of the road or anything. I'm of course worried about this guy, thinking that, I don't know, maybe he needs help or something. He doesn't seem to be visibly intoxicated from what I can tell, and he doesn't appear injured or confused, so I assume that he's mostly okay. After a little while of standing, he raises his arms in a well kind of motion. I don't know if he was expecting me to back up or hit him or what, so I decided to sound my horn to try and nudge him along a bit, as I just want to get home. And this makes him flip out completely. He closes the distance to my car and starts pounding on it, yelling at me like crazy. I can't hear what he's saying, but he does this for what must have only been a few seconds, felt way longer at the time, before rounding the side of my car and punching the driver's side window at full force. Fortunately, it held up and it didn't crack. The second that I know that he's out of the way, though, I absolutely floor it and get the heck out of there, happy in the knowledge that he couldn't catch up to me. So yeah, that was a really creepy random encounter and hopefully my last one. I do hope that Mr. Spooky Car Puncher is okay and getting whatever help it is that he might need. Though, probably best to start with a doctor for his likely broken hand. This happened back in 2018. I was 24 and my sister was 25. We are both native New Yorkers and there are plenty of stories that I have. I think we all know that New York is a bit strange, but anyway, we were on a crowded train going to meet up with a friend. There were no seats, so we were holding onto this pole. It's already a bit of a tight squeeze, but this man and this girl, not related, get on and hold the pole that my sister and I are both holding. We're both talking, and I notice the man directly in front of us keeps on looking at us, like really looking. I'm already feeling uncomfortable as it is, and it's hard not to pay attention. I just try to ignore it by talking to my sister in the end. By the way, we are nowhere near our destination. A couple of train stops later, though, he eventually says to us, "Are you guys sisters?" We both sort of look at one another, feeling awkward, and I'm like, yeah? At this point, I'm praying that the train would hurry up to the next stop so that we could get off. I know that my sister is thinking the same thing. The other girl is looking at us, and she looks uncomfortable too. He smiles and seems to get excited, if you know what I mean. He then says to us, "Oh, you guys are sisters, huh?" in an incredibly perverted tone. He then licks his lips and keeps looking from my sister to me back and forth. At this point, the girl gives us an awkward smile and she looks just as terrified as we do. I can tell that this man is getting really excited by the fact that we said that we were sisters and comments about how beautiful we are. My sister looks at me and we see a stop coming up. We both know that it's not our stop, but at this point, we were just leaving the train. He keeps trying to talk to us and we keep ignoring him, and as soon as the doors open, we leave. Again, I've been in many weird and uncomfortable situations, but the fact that he was literally so close to us with his perverted smile, his excited eyes, and, well, excited you know what. Yeah, I'm glad that we were able to get away from him safely, and thankfully, he didn't follow us. So I shared a story with you guys a little while back. One of them was about a deer person or something out there where my grandmother lives. I don't live there anymore and I live 45 minutes away from her, but yeah, that was me. Anyways, I took out my dog tonight. My dog was peeing and I was on my phone, but we live in an apartment complex with thick woods in the back. My dog started growling, which is weird because, well, he never does. That's when I looked over and he was, and I'm honestly shaking thinking about it, but with my physical eyes, I see this 6.5 or 7 foot deer thing again. First thought was it was a Wendigo. I mean, it was thin and skinny with very wet fur, the deer skull and all that. It didn't seem to have eyes from where I was standing, but I could tell that it was staring right at us. It didn't move, didn't even make a sound. At that, I began to pull my dog back, and I looked back because I stepped on a stick, and when I did, it moved to the other side of the tree. I kind of yelled instinctively, "You can't follow or harm me, go back." It didn't move, and I dragged my dog into the house and quickly shut the door. My wife asked why I slammed the door so hard, and I just told her that the dog was being weird. She just doesn't believe in that stuff. Anyway, I went back out a few minutes ago, which was about an hour after it happened, and there was no sign of it. I'm really shaken up by this because, quite honestly, after I moved, I thought that this was all over. So this happened when I was 15 and my little sister was 12. A little bit of backstory here too. We lived in this small town for several years and it was a pretty safe place. A few years into living there, we had a cop with his wife and kids move in 2 houses down from us. Our house was built sometime in the 1920s, and a few nights before this incident, our other siblings locked us out of the back door. Us being idiots, we kicked the back door in. The door didn't budge, but the frame came out of the wall and the door was just sort of hanging there. One of our blinds was broken. We didn't have the money to fix it. Seeing as my parents had 8 kids and money was tight growing up, there was just no way. Anyways, the blinds were broken behind our TV. On the other side of the window was a garage and our driveway, next to the driveway on our neighbor's property, which was abandoned and had tall shrubs. What we didn't know, though, was that there were 2 people hiding in the shrubs watching us. I'm going to try and leave some details out just to make a really long story short, but my little sister's name, her name is Candace, and my name is Aria. It was the summer of 2009. My oldest brother and his girlfriend were a mile from our house fishing, about 10 at night. All of our siblings and parents were asleep. Besides my oldest brother out with his girlfriend fishing, I was sitting in front of the TV watching it. Candace was sitting on the bed watching TV with me too. When all of a sudden, Candace and I heard a very loud crash, a noise from the back door. We both screamed. We got up, ran to the phone and called our brother's cell phone. He said that he was on his way because his girlfriend apparently twisted her ankle anyway. He gets home eventually, and by this point we woke everyone up in the house and had all the lights on. My brother tells us to stay in the house. My brother is 6'4" and 300 pounds. Unknown to my family though, I slipped outside to check with my brother. I know it was stupid of me to do this, but I was a curious kid. I saw my brother being really quiet. He ran back to our fenced-in backyard. He gets within arm's reach of this guy and he steps on a stick. The guy turns and looks back at my brother and takes off running and hops the fence, and he got away, sadly. I didn't see this because I went into the house after a while, but this is what my brother said. My brother comes in. He tells everyone that he saw a guy all in black and he was about 6 foot. This is all that he saw, apparently, and the rest of the night was pretty calm, but my brother was definitely on high alert. Now, the next night, my brother was out with his girlfriend, wherever they were at that time. It was again about 10 at night. Candace and I are watching TV again in the same spot as last time, and again we hear a loud crash coming from the back door. We screamed again and called our brother's cell phone. He came home again, the whole house was awake again, and all the lights were on as well. My brother goes out and checks it out. This time he didn't see anyone out there. Oh, and I forgot to mention too that both of these times we looked at the back door. Both times the back door looked like it was kicked in really hard. This time, around the frame was out of the wall more, and the door was leaning further into the house as well. We didn't make a police report because we had a cop that lived like 2 houses down from us, and while he was at work, us kids would help take care of his pregnant wife, bring her over food, play with her kids. We didn't really see him much. And when we did, he was so sweet and nice, but anyway, we told the police officer what had happened, and he told us that he thinks that there are 2 guys, that they've been stalking our house and watching us. The cop comes over and checks and looks. He said, I believe that there are 2 guys. One keeps lookout while the other one does the possible break-in, apparently. He said that they've probably been looking through our broken blinds. He also said at night they could look in and you couldn't see anything if you look out. And after those 2 nights, thankfully there was no attempt to break in anymore. But fast forward to the fall of that year, and our cop neighbor, he comes over one day and told us something. He said, I'm not supposed to tell you this, but we caught a peeping Tom. He's in jail now, about 20 or so miles away, and he said that after the peeping Tom got caught, everything around this neighborhood apparently stopped. That the town was safe again because it seemed to be this guy. Candace and I were obviously freaked out and scared, and to this day her and I have to have all of our doors and windows locked. In fact, we check multiple times a day. If any of our curtains are open, we sort of get a bit scared, so we close the curtains every time. Honestly, I'm pretty afraid that it'll happen again. Thankfully, we no longer live in that town, but that thought is still very much ever present. To this day, we don't know what their intentions were. We don't know if it was 1 or 2 guys, but I think that if he had gotten in, that honestly, we wouldn't be here today, and that is a very scary thought. I've had many experiences with the paranormal and interactions in my home, and I thought that I would share some here for all of you guys. So my wife is a childhood diabetic, and sometimes at night her sugar levels will drop dangerously, which can put her into a coma. I'm a very light sleeper and have trouble sleeping in general, so one night at about 2 a.m. I got up to go and watch TV, and as I walked past my wife, I looked at her and noticed 2 orbs above her head. One was bright yellow, and the other one was sort of a whitish, yellowish color. I looked, took a couple of more steps, and then went, "What the heck?" I backed up, and sure enough, the orbs were still above her head, so I went to check on my wife, and sure enough, she was profusely sweating, a sign of low sugar. We figure to this day that those orbs, they may have been her parents or something, and they were trying to tell us that something was wrong. On another night, I came back to bed and noticed an orb on my bed. I sat down on my bed and moved the blankets around, lifting them up and stuff to see if it was a light trick, but the orb just stayed there. I moved around, waved my hands, but the light was never blocked. But then, I heard a thump on the floor, and noticed that the orb was now at the base of our dresser, and about shoulder height of our dear cat, Winston, who passed in 2007. Still miss him a lot, by the way. We have often felt him jump on the bed or jump off like that too, but this seemed to be something else. Again, I was up watching hockey at about 4 a.m. when I noticed a black triangle zip across the screen against the white ice. Hey, there's a bird in the stadium, I thought, so I rewound the game. It was PVR, but there was no bird. Now, this isn't all that odd, I admit, but the next night I just climbed into bed when I felt 2 tugs on my blanket right by my shoulder. I ignored them and I went back to sleep, but the next night, as I was laying in bed, I swear that I felt a heavy weight sit on the edge of the bed beside me, and that absolutely terrified me. After that, whatever it was didn't return, but my wife has a friend who can interact with spirits, and she apparently said that it was someone named Kevin. Now, this next one I absolutely hate. So I have a fan that has a safety feature, and if you touch the fan shroud, it will stop the fan so kids can't be hurt. But suddenly, every night for months, at 3 a.m.-ish, the fan would stop, and when it stops, it makes a sort of loud electrical sound, a buzzing sound. The fan never stops at any other time except then, and I always felt that there was someone standing in that corner watching me each night, and this freaked me out, so I moved the fan to an empty room, and guess what? It didn't stop. If it did stop at random times, it was on from like 10 p.m. to 9 a.m., I would definitely say electrical problem, but every night at around 3 a.m., pretty much bang on, it would always stop, which was a bit strange. Now, the reason for sharing all of the above is that this next one happened just 2 nights ago. I was awake laying in bed and I could hear someone walking back and forth at the foot of the bed, and it was keeping me awake. Then, I heard a tapping sound from our baseboard heater, then walking, then tapping, and, well, this was too much, so I growled, "Will you get lost? You're keeping me awake." And right after I said this, there was a loud thump on the floor like I startled it, and the air in the room became really much lighter, I guess you could say. I have more experiences, but these are probably the best ones. I guess I'm a bit tuned into spirits or whatever, but for the third one I think I brought it on myself, knowing that I'm a bit sensitive to all this stuff I've been saying in my mind. If any spirit needs help and you are a good spirit, I'll try to help you. And I guess Kevin needed help, and perhaps that's why he approached. But whatever the case, it was still very terrifying, and quite honestly I didn't really expect it, I guess. But here's hoping that after this last one, things will start to calm down. In about 1999, I finally saved up enough money to put a down payment on my own fixer-upper. It hadn't been lived in for quite a while, and it actually had been used by a local church as a youth facility. It was about 100 years old on the deed. It was located in a mill village in the Carolinas, and it was only 4 rooms and a bathroom at about 800 square feet. It was on one of the bigger lots in town. Now, I was recently divorced and living with a friend who I had worked with at one time who was also ex-military, so it worked out well moving into a house. He worked in law enforcement now and wasn't there much, but paid half of everything, which gave me some extra money for improvements. We had really nice neighbors, all retired, and I had many talks over the fence with them. As you can imagine though, 2 single guys living in one place, we had many women in and out of our doors. My elderly neighbor was a retired textile worker who was single most of her life and understood our habits. As I demolished the kitchen, I tore out everything down to the bare walls and replaced plaster with drywall. As it was slow going, considering that I was going to school and working both full-time, there wasn't a lot of time for the remodeling. We did have one big table in the kitchen that we used for, well, pretty much everything. And one day, I came in from class and took my books out of my backpack and separated them by class in order to go through them quicker. I made a sandwich and joined with my roommate and his girlfriend in the next room just to catch up with the day. I just sat down when I heard all of my school books hit the floor in the kitchen. My roommate was the first to jump up with a weapon in hand because he thought someone was trying to break in. As we looked in the kitchen, Not one item was on the table though. I picked everything up and put it in my backpack. I've always believed that spirits were possible, but after seeing this, I definitely had more to believe in, I guess. Puzzled that no door was open and that this happened, we just sort of joked about it and said ghost. The next day, I asked my neighbor next door if anyone had ever died in my house. She dropped her head for a minute and she said yes, 2 people in fact, a husband and wife who lived there for many years. That's not one of the first things you ask when you find a good deal on a house, I guess, and it was a lesson learned, but she said that the husband died first of natural causes, but the wife apparently had schizophrenia and lived many years after him. I also asked my neighbor if she had seen anything odd, and she said yes. She said that she had seen lights going on and off occasionally. I then said I sort of meant like, have you ever looked over at my house? And she chuckled and said no. Different things happened after that too, like we would come in and TVs would be on when we know that we turned them off. Lights the same way. I said something to my neighbor again and she said let me come over and talk to her. We had been friends before her health got bad. So my neighbor walked in and started talking to her as if she was standing right there and told her that we were good guys and we were going to take care of the house and we had to learn to live together. And amazingly enough, after that, there was really nothing else for quite a while. Now, I had finished the kitchen and started on the bathroom remodel at this point. At about the same time my roommate was making plans to move out and a girl I was dating was moving in, we were planning to get married soon. She had a son and I had to prepare a room for him with a big closet for his stuff. And it was at this point that things started happening again with the lights and TV and stuff falling off the kitchen counter again. My roommate said that he had lost his key to his room, swearing that it was on the keychain, but I dismissed it because I was going to replace it anyway. Later, when pulling up carpet for the new walk-in closet in my stepson's room, I found my ex-roommate's key, believe it or not, under the carpet that I had pulled up. And honestly, I have no idea how that could happen. I had replaced that lock when my ex-roommate moved in and I checked and the key matched the lock. That was unbelievably odd. In the time that I was fixing up her son's room and the time that she was to move her stuff in, one afternoon I came home from school and drank a couple of beers and took a nap, only to wake up abruptly to my stereo blasting so loud that it was deafening. Mind you, this was one of those old school stereos that you adjusted volume by the knob and not a remote. I jumped up and turned it off. Irate, I remember saying something to the effect that this was my house, and if we both can't live here, I'll burn it down. I think I even said that if there was a light near where she was, that she needed to go to it. And after that, there was absolutely nothing for the next 6 years that my new wife and stepson ever experienced. Thinking back, maybe negative energy had been building up in the home for some time, because some decisions were made for her son to go into a private school near where his father lived for a better education, and even though I didn't agree, she did it for his future and I understood, but our relationship paid for it in the end with divorce after 8 years. Nothing I can remember stands out after my wife left, other than that she said that in the end that the house gave her bad vibes and she wanted nothing to do with it. I had wondered at one point if the spirit of the woman wanted me to be there, but wanted only me because there had absolutely been nothing else that had happened the entire time that I lived there alone. A few things did happen though by surprise during the sale of the home when I was preparing to sell. Like the furnace needed repairs and my entire front sill collapsed right before the home inspection due to termite erosion. That happened years before I bought it, mind you, but there were a small string of events like this of just unfortunate luck, I guess. On a side note, it was odd how other information had come to me about the residents of my home prior to me living there through a woman I had dated when I first moved in. She had lived a few miles away, and when I told her about what had happened with the books and the table, a neighbor of hers was nearby and overheard our conversation and asked where I lived. I told him, and he said that he grew up over that way and they used to play ball in the church parking lot near there, and that the woman who lived there when he was a boy had a lot of mental issues. If they hit a ball into her yard, she would grab it and take it in her house and throw it in her wood stove and burn it, apparently. And that wood stove, when I moved in, it was the one in the kitchen. The one that I had trouble with as I was trying to sell it. Recently, there was an Amber Alert, and my daughter was asking me what that beeping sound was all about. For those who don't know, an Amber Alert goes out when a child is reported missing. If you receive notifications, you know what I'm talking about. The alert will sometimes give information like the victim's appearance as well as the perpetrator, the location of the abduction, make and model of a vehicle, stuff like this. Anyway, my phone started beeping one evening while helping my daughter clean her room, an Amber Alert. She asked about it. I gave her a small rundown, and that was that. However, it triggered a childhood memory that I have where I believe with all of my heart that I was almost kidnapped when I was a kid. To be clear, this isn't a memory that was laying dormant in my subconscious or anything, and this random Amber Alert and talk with my kid caused it to resurface in my mind. This incident is something that I've pondered and thought about off and on for years now. I'm a 41-year-old male, by the way. So, it's been a while since I've considered the factors and details of the experience, and this recent Amber Alert and talk with my daughter really caused me to pause and reflect on the incident itself once again. And so, here I am. As a parent, you worry about these things and you do all you can to protect your children, especially when you personally experience something truly scary, just like this. Now, the occurrence happened when I was just a young kid. My guess is around 7 or 8. I can't be sure, but I think that that's a safe estimate based on the fact that much of these early childhood memories aren't really there anymore. I do remember my kindergarten experience, which I would have been 5 or 6, and also later grades as well, but this incident must have happened sometime after or maybe even around the ages of 7 to 8. My parents took me to a neighboring city to do some shopping one day, but we lived in a small rural town with not much on offer, so from time to time we would go to this neighboring city, about 45 minutes from where we were located. It just had more to offer, I guess, and they would take me up there for school clothes shopping, out to eat because restaurants were better, and because my mum was a bit of a crafter. She loved to make crafts, it was her thing. There were these different craft stores and a fabric store that she liked going up to there as well. Now, on this specific trip, we went to a fabric store up there, Joanne Fabrics to be exact. This was a pretty big store. As a little kid, I guess most every place seems big, but no kidding, this was actually a pretty sizable place. My dad, he sat out in the car while I went in with my mum. He did that a lot growing up. He would just sit in the car when there was a store that he didn't want to go into, so I really can't blame him there. I can't recall exactly what all my mum was looking for or trying to get in that store that day, but I do remember what section we were in. An area with a bunch of racks with various fabrics hanging. Imagine a clothing store with circular racks with clothes hanging around them, and that's pretty much what it's like at this fabric store, racks of hanging fabrics. I remember this area being sort of slightly toward the beginning or entrance of the store. As my mum was looking through these racks, I sort of began to wander around, not far though, just enough to kind of look around myself. I was probably bored and started wandering around, is my guess, but I could still see my mum just up and over a few racks away, so it wasn't like I was on the other side of the store or anything. Anyway, a random man approached me, and honestly, I can't even remember at what direction he came from. It's just like I was there by myself one minute, and the next I looked up and saw this guy. It was like he came in fast and sort of out of nowhere. But I quickly looked over to where my mum was. She had moved a few racks up and away, but I could still see her. there was a fair bit of distance between my mum and me at this point. And so here I am, standing behind some rack of fabric with this older guy opposite me on the other side of this rack. Then he speaks. "Hey little boy, how you doing there?" I remained silent because this took me completely off guard. He asked, "Where's your folks at? Are you alone in here?" I stood still and sort of quiet. "Come here, I got something to show you." At this point, he started advancing toward me, coming around the rack to where I was. I quickly started the other way, but he stopped and started coming around the other way as if to meet me in the middle. I was scared at this moment and became instantly aware that this man seemed a bit dangerous and like he was trying to get a hold of me. "Come here," he barked. I jerked fast to the left, but he did the same. And at that point, he had this real wild look in his eyes. Whichever direction I went, he followed, but remember, there's a rack between us. Honestly as well, I'm so thankful for that rack. After some back and forth movements from me and this man, I finally lock on with my mum and yell, "Mum, help!" You would have thought that I had screamed bloody murder. It was so loud, but it got my mum's attention and did the job. "What's wrong?" she asked. This startled the man, and he looked over his shoulder in the direction of my gaze and confirmed that yes, that must be his mother. His demeanor all of a sudden completely changes, and it's as if everything is just fun and games, and he was just messing around, and he said as much to my mum. "I was just messing around with him. No harm, ma'am." My mum came to where I was, and as we reconnected, the guy just sort of tips his hat at my mum and makes his way out of the store. I explained to my mum what had just happened, that this guy was trying to get me. I was so upset and really shook up. She told me that I did the right thing by yelling and getting her attention. It was terrifying for sure though, and I'm thankful that something crazy didn't happen. Could I have been imagining things, like maybe this guy was really just messing around? I seriously doubt it. I very much think that there were nefarious intentions. I mean, why would a random older guy be perusing a fabric store? If he was there for something like crafts or fabrics, why promptly leave when confronted? To this day, I truly believe that he was up to no good. Back in August of 2023, we were staying at an Airbnb in Hatch, Utah. This place didn't have any air conditioning, considering the elevation of Hatch, and the temperature was pretty comfortable. This will be relevant later. Now, on the first night, my wife and I were out stargazing since the sky was devoid of light pollution and clouds. I had my GoPro set up and my phone taking photos, and we were just staring up enjoying the stars. That was when my wife pointed out to me what appeared to be a single small satellite floating across the sky. As we were looking at it, however, it then multiplied into 3 lights in a sort of triangle shape. It continued to expand in the same manner until there were about 7 lights in a larger triangle pattern. That in and of itself is pretty weird, right? But what really was just bizarre was the sky that was visible within that triangle shape more or less froze like a screenshot, and then that section of the sky was moving with the triangle while the rest of the sky around it was stationary. The best way I can think to describe it would be like in the movie Predator and his active camo invisibility tech. The world behind him was visible but sort of skewed, and this triangle passed over the sky for a few short minutes until it just seemed to either rise rapidly and disappear or shrink rapidly. It was about that time that we noticed that it had also gone eerily silent outside with us. No crickets or anything. Even the wind seemed to have stopped. We decided to go in for the night after that, as we were both pretty weirded out by it. In awe, of course, but also weirded out. I got some good pictures of the night sky, but of course, as is usual, they didn't see anything weird. Anyway, a few hours later, the same evening when we were getting ready for bed, I wanted to try a long exposure setting that I had found on my GoPro, so I was standing on the porch taking pictures. That is when I heard the whistle. Now, I'm not an overly superstitious man by any means, but I've heard stories, and not wanting to take my chances, I didn't return the whistle. There was a second whistle shortly after the first that expedited my decision to just go back inside. Weirded out, we just sort of laughed it off in the end and made sure the doors were locked, and we went to bed. Mind you, due to the lack of air conditioning in this house, the windows were all open for airflow. An hour or so later, after we were asleep, my wife wakes me up to ask if I hear something. It was at this point that we both hear very clearly a deep growl and breathing like that of a bear or a large animal outside of our window on the porch. Not loud, but definitely very bassy. We could hear heavy footsteps on the porch as well. We woke our friends up and quickly turned all the lights on to look around. There were no footprints on the dusty porch and none in the soft mud around the porch, so this experience we really just cannot explain. Of course, our friends were asleep in their room and they didn't hear a thing, and they didn't experience the earlier sighting outside either. Nothing else weird happened while we stayed there for the rest of that trip though. But the final thing to have happened, and this is the part that really weirded my wife out, was that a month or so later, when we were back home, we were in the kitchen making dinner when she looked up and there was an owl sitting on the fence just sort of staring into the house at us. I wasn't at that time aware of the correlation between alien sightings and abductions and the sighting of owls, but I definitely am now. To our knowledge, we didn't have any lost time events or anything like that, but it just kind of felt like we saw something that we weren't supposed to see, and maybe they were checking us out to see if we were cool. For my wife, this is all a little bit too much, and it has made her very uneasy to stare at the stars as much anymore. I, on the other hand, am still very much intrigued. We haven't noticed any more owls as of late, so who knows if it was just a coincidence or not. But I'm sharing this because I want to describe my experience and just explain it to someone out there. I would also be interested in hearing if anyone else has experienced, well, anything like this. I went camping with my wife and stepdaughter the other night, near Laguna Mountain in California. We were off the main road in a secluded route that seldom had cars passing by. No foot traffic through the area at all, however. And we heard a noise late during the night that honestly could be explained logically by something natural, I guess. Something we just don't know about. However, my wife and I have both been losing sanity trying to understand what that noise could have been, or what could have made the noise. The first occurrence of the noise occurred around midnight, and we can only describe it as a slow, deliberate, rhythmic nail scratching on the tensioned paracord strips that were securing the tent to the ground. Naturally, we thought that it might have been a critter curious about the tent, but the slowness and the rhythm of the noise makes us believe otherwise, because critters like that generally scratch quickly and sounds more hasty, I guess. The other conclusion that leads us to believe that it wasn't a critter was because of the fact that throughout the night, we actually did hear squirrels running around outside, curious of all of our stuff that was outside. Why is that detail important? Because during the time leading up to the noise, and the time after the noise, we heard absolutely no critters outside running up to or away from the tent. Which means that whatever was creating the noise was absolutely silent coming up to and away from the tent, or, eerily enough, may have actually been floating or something of that nature. We did hear it again at around 2 a.m. the same night, and during that specific episode, the noise seemed to have shifted from one corner of the tent to the corner closer to our heads, allowing us to even feel the vibration of the scratching reverberating throughout the floor of the tent. And that's what leads me to believe that it was the taut paracord strips, because of the tension allowing the vibration to be much stronger. Now, we may have also heard the noise again a third time, but it seemed so weak and went on for such a small duration compared to the other times that we honestly couldn't really key in on the noise that time. So we aren't sure if it was actually the same thing or just our sanity playing tricks on us at that point. My wife and I were very disturbed when we heard that though, and it honestly kept us awake and on high alert for a long time. We're very curious to know what it may have been as well, and that's why I'm here. Has anyone had a similar experience, or does anyone have an explanation as to what that could have been? I'm 23, female, and from the UK. From the ages of 9 to 11, I was best friends with this girl that we'll call Sarah. She and I formed a little group at primary school with two other girls. Their names were Lauren and Ellen, but we were each other's best friends first, as we lived so close. Sarah lived one street over from me, so I would always sleep over at her house, but she never came over to my house as we were very, very poor, and honestly I was embarrassed about the state of my house. The sleepovers became a bit of a weekly thing though, and it was just her and her mum who worked every weekend, so we spent a lot of time in the house alone. She would show me her mum's explicit material from like the 80s that all included vampires. As a 9-year-old, I had no idea what was going on, and I'd just sort of sit there blankly. She'd always say, "Doesn't it make you want to do it?" and things like that. She would also get her mum's toys and show them to me and make me hold them, which never really seemed odd to me, I guess, until I got a bit older. But even at the time, I felt uncomfortable. I was a pretty nervous child, and I struggled to make friends, so I'd often go along with whatever she said, just because I felt lucky to have a friend, outside of school that is. But she would often make up scary stories or do sort of mildly creepy things at night, like sing patty cake in a babyish voice close to my ear while I was sleeping, or pretend her dolls were alive and wanted to punish me for taking her attention away from them, which creeped me out but never outright concerned me, I guess. Though my mum was worried that I was having constant nightmares at this point. None of this affected me though too much, and so I stayed friends with her. Later that year I got mauled by a dog, Japanese Akita, and had reconstructive surgery on my face. Due to this, I had to take medication at certain times, and would be escorted to and from the school office every day by my other friend, Lauren. Because of this, we became best friends, and I started sleeping over at her house instead of Sarah's. Sarah didn't like that I was getting a lot of attention due to my fresh scar that I had, or that I had replaced her with another friend, so she said that I was pregnant at 10. Complete with tears and plans and everything, including Ellen telling her mum at the end. As kids, we really didn't even question the validity of her claim. At some point, she dropped this, and next she pretended that she had cancer. I called her out on that one, as I knew a lot about cancer because my auntie had it at the time, which she really didn't like. After that, she started calling me names, stealing my school stuff, made up lies about me, and more, making our other two friends pick me or her. It fluctuated a lot, so sometimes they'd be my friends, other times they'd be hers. During this time, though, I slept over at Lauren's a lot, and a lot of my stuff went missing. A pink flip phone that I just got as my first phone ever. This was like 2010. And my DS Lite, which was my prized possession at the time. My mum, she got involved at this point and demanded that they find it, as she knew that I'd taken it to the sleepover. In the end, Lauren supposedly found them both smashed up on a road far from either of us lived, and returned them to me completely broken weeks later. Later on, Sarah and I got invited to swimming baths for Lauren's birthday, and for once we got along like it was having my best friend back. Us kids were basically left alone in the pool to mess around for a few hours. An important note here too is that I really couldn't swim, and I still can't. I had chickenpox during school swimming lessons, and I'm terrified of water now, so I've just never learned since then. Anyway, at one point I was so sick of being stuck in the shallow end, like a baby at the age of 11, when all of my friends were swimming in the deep end. Sarah noticed this and came over to me. She offered to piggyback me and swim me to the deep end so I could play with everyone else. I was really happy to be included. I didn't even think about the fact that she didn't really regularly like me, or that if she left me, I really couldn't swim back. I just hopped right on, and she swam us out. She started mock tipping me sideways like she was going to drop me, and I cried and begged her to take me back. I was terrified of getting water in my face or going underwater. Still can't go underwater to this day. She just laughed at me though, and then dropped me, dunking me under the water and holding my head there where I struggled and I couldn't breathe. I remember struggling and being unable to breathe, but the next thing I knew, a lifeguard had pulled me to the side of the pool and I was choking on air and shaking. I also have horrible reactions to the smell of chlorine, and it makes me sneeze and my eyes swell up, so I had to be picked up, but everyone told me that it was an accident and just kids messing around. She later told me that it was just a joke. I should learn to swim and stop being a baby, which I guess is kind of true, but still, after that day, I didn't want to be around her anymore. Our friends still flip-flop between us, some days being her friend, other days being mine, but that was fine. I didn't care anymore and I was just sick of her. I avoided her like the plague at this point. And I mean, primary school was almost over, and after that, I never had to see her again. Eventually, we all went to secondary school, ages 11 to 16, and we all went to the same one, but my school was categorized into classes, the top being the smartest, and I, Lauren, and Ellen were all in the top class, and Sarah wasn't. It was a nice buffer, and I got my best friends back, as well as making more friends for the first time ever. And so I completely forgot about her, in all honesty. But then, one day as I walked home from school, I passed the corner shop on my way home, and she was there, blocking the path, waiting for me, it seemed. Her school tie was tied around her head like a headband, and she was crying. I tried to go around her, and she growled at me and launched herself at me. I was like 4'7", 80 pounds, if that, and she was much larger than me, and I'd never been in a fight, ever. I really had no idea what to do to get her off of me while she clawed at my neck and alternated kneeing me and elbowing me. I just wanted her off me. I grabbed the tie wrapped around her head and pulled her as hard as I could until she fell to the ground, and with that, she just ran away crying. I remember walking the rest of the way home so confused. I mean, what had I even done to her to deserve that? I mean, I hadn't even spoken to her in like 8 months at that point, and she and our other friends were in the same tutor group, and they hadn't mentioned anything to me. Eventually, I forgot about that too. I turned 12 a couple of months later, and the day after my birthday, I walked into school having spent all of my birthday money on new pens that I was excited to show off. I was a bit of a weird kid, I know, but first lesson of the day begins, and Ellen runs up to me and says, "Sarah's brought a knife to school. She showed me in tutor, and she said that she brought it for you." At first, I kind of laughed out loud at that, assuming that it was a joke of some kind, since any sort of weapon brought to our school was grounds for immediate expulsion, and nobody was stupid enough to try that, especially at 12 years old. I think I even made a joke about it, probably being a butter knife. She repeated, though, that apparently she was serious, that she told the teachers about it, and they'd actually called the police at this point. Again, though, I just didn't believe her. To me, it seemed crazy that they would call the police over a 12-year-old bringing a knife to school. But they did. The police arrived minutes later, and that was that. I never saw the knife, but she was immediately expelled. I don't know for sure why me or what she had planned to do, but she must have told multiple people that she was going to do something to me, because it was an ongoing joke the rest of the time that I was at school. She ended up going to the school my little sister had just started at, and she apparently also told my sister that it had been for me, but it was just a joke. Side note, my little sister is a year younger and is a fighter, and at this stage, I've still never been in a real fight, and my sister has always fought anyone who badmouthed me. She's a real one for sure, but my sister apparently punched her for that, and that was the last that I heard from her until I was like 18 years old. I turned 18 and I was at university, and then out of the blue I was tagged in an old primary school photo by Sarah. It had the whole class in it, but she tagged only me. I found this a bit odd, but didn't do anything about it, and it was on my old Facebook account anyways, so I just ignored it. A couple of months later though, it was Sarah's birthday, and she sent me a message asking if I would come to her birthday party. Mind you, I hadn't spoken to her in like 6 years at this point, and the last time I had, she'd fought me and then brought a knife to school. So in the end, I simply ignored the message and I just moved on with my life. Later I saw that she and Lauren had reconnected and were best friends again apparently, which always concerned me as Lauren and I had stayed friends for years and she knew everything about how Sarah had treated me. But I've never really put much thought into it, other than that it's likely that they were still friends the whole time and Lauren had stolen my DS and phone because of Sarah and they'd broken them together. But the last time that I saw her, I was 19 and I was on a date with my boyfriend walking down the street, and I saw her standing at the bus stop. I wasn't really bothered since I'd neither seen or heard anything from her for years, until our eyes met, and she grinned and pulled out her phone and started filming me until I was out of sight. Now, I have no idea why she did any of the things that she did, and I mostly feel sorry for her based on the way her life has turned out so far. But really, I still hope that I never, ever run into her again.